right, let's do this. Okay.
And I don't care how big these people are. I don't care how, if they're big directors or big writers, that's not enough. That's not enough. And just because, well, he said it, and it's on this video, and that video, and he's hashtagged, and he's repeating this, and he's got 200 hits. I don't give a damn about that. That means nothing to me. Just because somebody says it. That's number one. Number two, making jokes about something is not the same. Or, if you were to say, I love vivisection. I love experimenting on animals alive without anesthesia. I love it. It's like, you're sick. Here's a joke about vivisection. Oh my God. How many cats does it take? Stop it. This is horrible. What have I committed? Any crimes? No. Yeah, but you're joking about that. You even have pictures in your home about that. So what? Yeah, but you probably do it. Maybe I do. That's not a crime. It's crude, it's crass. That's a thought. How spell Texas against Johnson. Classic SCOTUS oral argument. Thank you. Lawrence Stahl. You hear what's going on here? I don't get what somebody says. Yeah, but you don't understand. No, wait a minute. No. They said same thing that happened. Yeah, but those Israelis were dancing and happy about 9/11 happening. So what? So they did it? Sure. They did it. What? Well, this guy's got on his Instagram account some pretty. Why would somebody joke about that if they didn't do it? I don't know. You see where we're going with this? You've got to be careful. We have standards to maintain. We're the ones who are always saying free speech. Mickey Mouse laying down law to Fox News. Well, yeah. You're getting this as happening. Yeah. That's why this is most important. So one of the things I wanted to do is, I wish we could go and wish we could say, hey, folks, you want to be a journalist? Great. You want to have a website? Great. You want to do your own YouTube channel? Terrific. Let's talk about proof, accusation, and let's talk about when we need to discuss other things. Because what's happening right now is the thought vigilantes are getting out of control. Eric Thaddeus Walter says, V spokesman is Fox correspondent Burke. Opus Dei. Oh, Vatican spokesman. Friends with Cardinal Burke, no blood relation.
Hey, we just lost Bravo.
Cardinal Pell, head of the Vatican Economics and IOR, still under pedo trial. Blacked out in Australia. And rest of international
We are taking Delta. We have made it Delta.
media. Oh, Aussie Fox Murdoch. See? Oh, let me stop you right now.
They are attacking Charlie.
When you have a priest, a cardinal, a prelate, this and that, on trial, charged with crimes against children, whatever it is, that is a completely different story. What about circumstantial evidence? Okay, we'll get to that. Very good question, Gina. That is a completely different story. That is an ongoing charge. And you, as a journalist, because you're a journalist now, you can talk about the trial, but you're talking about the fact that it is going on. Let me talk to you back to the hearsay thing. J9 is suing Eric Thaddeus Walters for libel. Hypothetical. J9, the plaintiff, claims that Eric Thaddeus Walters said to everybody that J9 is a communist. And he has suffered dramatically from his loss his job, and it's not true. It better not be true, because if it's true, it's not libel. So J9 is suing Eric. J9 calls as his first witness Michael Cody.
We're taking Charlie.
Michael Cody takes a stand and testifies, yeah, I heard Eric Thaddeus Walters say to everybody that J9 is a communist. Is that hearsay? 1, push number 1 for yes, 2 for no. Is that hearsay? Going back, J9 is suing Walters, claiming that Walters called him a communist. J9, the plaintiff, calls Michael Cody first witness. And witness says, I heard it. I was there, and Walters, as clear as day, in front of thousands and millions of people, said J9's a communist. Is that hearsay? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. 1 for yes, 2 for no. This is going to be good, because you're just hitting 1. Okay, a lot of ones there. Is that hearsay? A lot of yes there. A lot of yes. Is it an out-of-court statement? It sure is. It sure is. Why? Because Cody says, I heard somebody say that. Not in court, but someplace else. It wasn't under oath. What is it being offered for? Truth of the matter asserted? No. It's not hearsay. What? Wait a minute. No. Because why am I offering it? Why am I introducing it? Do I want it to be true? Absolutely not. If it's true, we don't have a case. I just want to introduce it to prove it was said. Because one of the things everybody in libel has to do is prove something was said. It's called publication. You got to prove it was published. You got to prove it was said. And I'm calling Michael Cody to the stand, not because it's true. It can't be true. It just, did you hear this? Yeah, okay, good, he said it.
Okay,
That's it. It's also called res gestae and different things when you tear up a will. And what did you say when you, do you care? No, when you testify, you say, was there a fight? Yes. What did he say? I heard him say, your mother's a no good. Objection, hearsay. It's not a hearsay objection. I'm not offering it to prove the truth. I'm just offering it to prove it was said. So, when you go on and you say, Cappy said this one said this one said that, there's a big difference in saying, I just want you to know, there's a lot of people out there saying a lot of things about this guy and making a lot of allegations. As opposed to, I believe it, it's true. George Cappy said this about this, and it's true. Why? Because he said it. That's a big difference in saying, did you know that today, the number of people who are making public allegations against people is up to 400 right now? That's a completely different story than it's true because he said it. That make any sense? See, this stuff, we got to teach these young and others as well. Things are... This Pizzagate got out of control because people, they just jump on this. Oh, then he's a pedophile. And he said that. And he said, how do you know he said that? Well, so-and-so said it. And I hear people say this sometimes. Well, of course he said it. Well, Alex said it. Well, Neon Revolt said it. Well, so-and-so said it. Wait a minute, hold it. That's okay, but that's not what I was looking for. That's not what I was looking for. Now, this thing that's also happening right now is that there is something that happens in this news world where people get involved in the flavor of it. And the troll part comes up. What's the troll part? That's this part deep down inside where somebody says, you know, I never realized this. But I go online and I get kind of, I don't know, I get angry or I don't know what I get. Or maybe some people, not all, some are a little bit lonely. Some people a little bit lonely, and they get involved in this stuff, and they start screaming and yelling and whatever. And next thing you know, they just jump into it, both feet into the mix, into the fray, and they are, I mean, they don't even miss a beat. It's just, now there are some others, and I'm not going to make any comment in terms of why. By the way, Fran Giannini says, you put any stock in what Isaac Happy is saying? Do I put stock? I don't know. Do you? I think it's interesting. Let's see what happens. What's the proof? When somebody says, this is what happened to me, I always listen when somebody says, I will tell you that this happened to me. When Corey Feldman, before he went off the rails or whatever, tried to sell this stuff, he was talking about stuff that happened to him or things that he directly was responsible for. I don't know, because remember, the first time, if I had to switch it and I had to represent, not that I would, but if I had to do damage control for the bad guys, if I was a black hatter, I would say, you let me do this. You come to me and you say, okay. What is it? Well, I'm charged with this, and okay. I'll show you what I'll do. I'll get some people, and I'll point to them. Maybe I'll lure. Maybe I'll send in a lost leader. Maybe I'll send in an agent provocateur, an agent provocateur, somebody to get them going. And I will get them to say something that's off the wall, off the charts, and I will say, see, there you go. Limited hangout. I'll say, see what happens? There you go. That's what you did. Oh, so you're one of those, huh? Oh, so I guess what? Are you one of those people who said that, what, that he's involved with whatever? And now, by the way, let me tell you something this much. Scott Berry says, try telling him about the rule against perpetuities. Oh, God, Scott. That's one thing. Life and beings plus 21? What the hell is that about? The fertile octogenarian exception to that one? How about that one? Springing interest? Oh, my. Rule in Shelley's case? Let me tell you something. Real property stuff is saying, whoa, what is this? Also keep in mind, title insurance is something that you get insurance for something that happened before the event. Probate is something that happens after. Only 2 times. You talk about before something happens or after something happens. Very interesting, but I digress. We're going to get to this. And I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, okay. And I'm not trying to make any, let me just say this much. If you want to be taken serious, and I mean it, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. You can dress however you want. You can act however you want. You can. But I guarantee you, there are some people and some YouTube sites and pages and platforms and vloggers, whatever you want to call these people. I guarantee you, I could put some of these people on and turn to the jury and say, you believe this? You believe this? Whenever you watch somebody, Fran, you got a good question. Whenever you watch somebody, ask, how do I know this is true? How do I know it's true? How do I know it's true? Do you ever watch somebody and say, I haven't heard him tell me why he knows this is true yet. What is true about this? Whatever it is. It could be anything. 9/11 could be whatever. First question, how do I know it's true? He said it because it happened to him. And he called the police. He's got the copy of the police report. Okay. That would be one thing. You don't need that. But first of all, how do you know it's true? Because he said it happened to him. Or, I've been watching this and I haven't heard him say how he knows this is true or why he's doing this. And whenever they talk about weird things happening, they say, yeah, huh. I can kind of see it. No. No matter who they say in Hollywood, name one person who say, do you know that so-and-so is a Satanist who's into frottage? Who? Vincent Price. I knew it. Because we don't know these people. We think we know them. So the first question is, how does this person know what he's saying? Number 2, here's the best part. Do you believe this? Number 3, is there a theatrical part of it? Does this person enjoy being the center of attention? Does this person, what do you think? Show it to a jury. You tell me. You buying this? If you do, it's up to you. Where's this coming from? Next, Why is nobody reacting to it? Sometimes it's the best thing to do. Rudy Giuliani should learn. Rudy Giuliani is reacting too much to it. Rudy is causing more problems for Trump by going back and having to clarify stuff. Now, interesting story. Another plate. Yesterday, oh, watch this. You're going to love this. Stop for a second. If you missed this, you missed it. Now watch this right now. Unrehearsed. Oh, honey. Watch this. Honey. Did you hear that Stormy Daniels is going to be in an anti-wind tour? Excuse me, what's her name? The big famous photographer, what's her name? Annie Leibovitz, a spread for Vogue.
No, I didn't just Delta, brother. Delta has been taken. We took Delta.
That's right. Vogue, the magazine that gave us Diana Vreeland and the most, at the time, Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels is going to grace the pages and of Vogue. This is what they're reporting. Can you believe Mrs. L hasn't even been able to walk straight since we heard this one? So yesterday we watched Julie Chen. Julie Chen, different plate, is the wife of Les Moonves. She is on a show called The Talk. It's on every day at 2 p.m., right? Eastern time? CBS. Interesting.
Delta's under attack, brothers.
Julie Chen issued something on Facebook, I think, when it broke Friday or Saturday. Huh? Twitter. And she said, I stand by my husband. I don't know what that means, but I stand by him. He's a good man. Whatever it was. She issued a statement, and that's it. So yesterday we tuned in to say, I wonder what Julie Chen is going to say. She said, I gave my statement. You read about it when it happened. That's the last thing and the only thing I'm going to say. Move on. Brilliant. Translation, that divorce is almost, sign it now. It's been done. For the past 6 months, you go back, I don't know if you're watching this stuff, but watch, because we've known about this thing coming with Les Moonves forever, and we don't work at CBS. We don't work. There's others. Let me give you another. Do you know, now listen to me, do you know, I promise you, I could tell you stuff that nobody would counter, nobody would disagree with. You would be shocked, and it would be like, wow. I'm not saying it's happy kind of stuff. And I have no reason to believe, and I've not watched, I'm sorry, but forgive me, I can watch a minute of it before I just physically can't watch it. Not because of the subject matter, the whole thing. That kind of vile, I'm sorry, I can't. So I don't even know, I'm not interested. That's not the way to do it. If you want to get somebody, if you want to invoke sympathy, that ain't it. But let me just go back to what I'm saying. I could tell you stuff that I promise you, everybody was saying, of course we heard it, of course we know that. But I don't. And there's a different reason for that. Number one, it's not what I want to do. I know that sounds like what I'm saying. I want to talk about things that are happening now. And I want to talk about things that are in the news, that are happening right now. Not, you know this, gossip. Gossip is different. What is gossip? Gossip's a simple thing. Here's a test for gossip. You ready? What's the difference between gossip and news? Let me ask you, what's the difference between gossip, also blind item? Blind items are a big thing. Blind item, gossip. What is the difference between gossip and news? What is it? What is it? Very quickly, in your own particular mind. What is it? Sam Adams says nothing. Facts? No. Gossip is facts. Absolutely facts. The gossip has to be True. Gossip is the young Turk. No, not really. No proof offered. News, they don't offer proof either. They just give you news. They just tell you stuff. Cuban bread, bug bite, a good answer. I like that. CNN facts. I'm up. Gossip is hearsay. No, facts are as well. Today the police reported. How many times, what do you think a police report is? What do you think an indictment is? It's like, that's hearsay. Somebody's reading this out-of-court statement. What is this? Cops all the time come into court and say, well, when I pulled this guy over, I didn't go deep into the world of hearsay, but when the cop testified, said, yes, Fran Giannini Leonardis, when before I arrested her, she started yelling, who ordered the veal cutlet and Lafayette? Objection. It's not hearsay. It's not hearsay. It is technically, but it's an exception because it's an admission. Or it's an excited utterance exception. There's all these exceptions. This is so complicated. Here's the bottom line. Listen to this. Here's news. News is this. Today, President Trump announced a... This is gossip. Today, President Trump. If you do this, the subject matter, the tawdriness of it, nobody says, did you hear the latest one? They're claiming that Russia bought Facebook. You say, why are you talking like that? No, that's gossip. It's not gossip, it's news. If you don't go like this, it's not gossip. Gossip is news. Gossip is news. I know. Now, gossip, you can say, well, that's kind of unsubstantiated. No. Gossip I'm talking about is stuff that's true, not, we hear. I was like, well, that's sort of whatever. We hear that so-and-so may be involved in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. That's not even gossip. That's not what that's about. Think about it. I'm not into the gossip part of it. That's not into it. I'm going to talk about what's happening now. But we need to have some kind of a class or involvement or something, especially on young people. This is before you do this. Understand a little bit about it. Just think about it. Not a journalist, because that's the worst thing in the world. Now, let me ask you this. How many times do you have people and somebody's taking pictures? They're out there watching. Your kids are playing at a birthday party. And they're in the pool, and they're having fun, and you're having a great time. And they're laughing and screaming. And one of the parents takes a picture of your kid and others playing nothing dirty or whatever. Or forget the pool. Just singing happy birthday, whatever it is. And he posts it. You say, hey, hello, Jerry, did you put this on YouTube yet? You didn't ask my permission. That's my kid there. Do you need permission for this? What if you go up to somebody and you say, hello, this is me. I'm Fran Giannini Leonardis reporting. I'd like to ask you a question. You have your phone on and you're recording this. And somebody says, well, here's what happened. And you take that recording and you decide to put it online. You got a problem with that? You got a problem? Any liability? Jennifer Small says, news is what happened or known today that didn't happen or known yesterday. You sound like Rumsfeld. Jennifer Small says, news is what happened or known today that didn't happen or known yesterday. Well, developing news. It's happening. This is what's happening. We're not sure about it. But I submit, Jennifer Small, is that news is facts. And the level of facts, whether it's gossip, is in the eye of the beholder. And they're just as valid, just as important, just as... If Jennifer Small, if we're standing outside and we have a camera, we're at a famous plastic surgeon's office, and there's somebody comes out with a towel. Sometimes, they have these side doors and a lot of these plastic surgery places, they're these offices, you don't really know who they are. It's like a psychiatrist's office. Sometimes they have these little mini, not that I know, but they have these little mini rooms so you don't see who's there. But if we're out there and we see a camera and somebody runs out with a towel over their head, they said, is that Demi Moore? Is that whoever, I don't know. I don't know what I'm thinking of her, but it seems kind of gossipy, doesn't it? Yeah? Well, is it really? I don't know. Seems to me it's kind of news. It's just news. Say what you want. I don't know what that's called. That may not be worthy of ABC, but it's happening. We're seeing it, and we're kind of guessing who's who. When you read an indictment and you say, I wonder who confidential informant 1 is. Well, that's what we're doing here. 1 off the 1S. Oh, let me see. Pandemonium, Tuesday night, Tampa, Florida. Be there. Virgil Runnels. Rest in peace. Oh, yeah. Pier 6 Brawl. Katie bar the door. A Crimson Mask. Virgil Riley. Italy's Conte landed in USA to meet with Trump. A Merkel-Soros-backed MSM campaign began to decry Italians as racist in Italy. JSR says, gossip or not, Bourdain was said to actually be Mossad. How'd he get to stay in Lebanon during the 06 bombings? Be so close. That's the scuttlebutt among some in the biz I've heard. Now, is that gossip? I don't know. That's what you heard, right? During Watergate, was Deep Throat gossip? Is Q gossip? Here's what I'm saying. You see what we're doing? We're spending too much time worrying about what gossip is. But we should be asking ourselves the question. Do you need any soldi? Pecunia? Dinero. Tu tienes dinero. ¿Ah? Mamita. Óyeme. Óyeme, tú tienes pan cubano con mantequilla. ¿Qué? ¿Qué dice? Watch this again. Stormy Daniels will be appearing in Vogue. I had to give her a Benadryl lesson. Is that upset? It's horrible. This is the end of society as we know. See, CNN is gossip. I don't know. Here's what I'm saying. If Fran or you or Jennifer or you or whoever, or you, JSR, Eric Thaddeus Walters, Scott Berry, if you say, I like this, I'm interested, you know, they say right now that so-and-so might be injured. I'm looking at the Giants training camp, and so-and-so may be in the DL list. I don't know. Is that? Well, we're hearing some scuttlebutt. That gossip? No! That's news, but I just told you the level of it. I'm not sure. But sports writers will not go from that press conference. Yep, he's on the list. That's right, Aaron Judge out for the season. Why? Somebody tweeted it. That's not new. That's all I'm saying. So there are people I sit back and I'm saying, you know what? This is not the way to go. And there are other people who come on and who come across so insane that if this is true, the people who are involved must be thinking, thank God I've got this lunatic coming on after. Somebody came out very serious. Very serious. And it explained. Let me tell you what really is the worst. The worst. 60 minutes. What happened? And I saw this before. Somebody looks for something. He's not standing there and saying, hey, what the fuck's going on? That's not sorry. What are you, Reverend Jim? This is not interested. I need to read that. He made this shit. All right. So what they do is that's the one. When you sit there and somebody's during the making of Dirty Dozen 12, there was a chance when Lee Marvin, I met with the I wasn't supposed to meet his assistant at the time left early for the day. It was in an office at the end, and when you start hearing this detail, when they, remember Reverend Jim, remember what Ignatowski meant? Star Child back. I said, Jim, that's not Star Child back. It's not? Anyway, when they tell you this, it's home. Now what happened was, read the Ileana Douglas article, read the New Yorker, read the facts. Here's one. She supposedly called Martin Scorsese. Not Scorsese. Scorsese. He's big. State your name for the record. Mr. Scorsese, do you recall receiving the objection here? Say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Do you remember her calling? Yes. What did she say? Objection. Wait a minute. Remember, the jury is listening. You can't unring the bell. Normally, you take the jury out, ask the question ahead of time, do a motion to eliminate, whatever it is. But anyway, what's this? And she said to me, that fool has attacked me. What should I do? Objection, hearsay. Is that hearsay? I like when they ask these people, well, you know, he'll be able to testify that when she said that, she was pretty upset at the time. She also told somebody else, and they'll be able to testify that she was pretty upset at the time. Is that enough? You're going to put somebody on and say, well, she was pretty upset at the time. Excuse me, Your Honor, we'll stipulate. Forget it. I'll stipulate she was upset at the time. We don't need to hear this. No, we want to hear them. Is that hearsay? 1 or 2? Meaning, is it admissible? Can you let that in? Here's the answer. Here's the answer. What did I always say the answer? Every single legal. What's the answer? You know the answer. See if they. What's the answer? Every legal question. And you say, can you do that? What do you say? Still waiting. Is that 403 evidence? Could that be excluded because it even though it's relevant? It depends. Ray, R-A-E, it depends. Thank you. It depends. How about this? Your Honor, we're offering this into evidence, not to prove the truth of the matter asserted, but the fact that it was said. Or, it was an excited utterance exception. When she said it, she was screaming. The reason why we let it in as an exception is because it has indicia of reliability and it's trustworthy. It's an exception. She was screaming, she was yelling. Oh my God, stop it! He just shot my husband. Objection. Wait a minute. Who yells that stuff? How about this? Statements made to a treating physician. Why? Why is that admissible? Wait a minute, David. Assuming it's not privileged. Why? Who lies to their doctor? Good point. Statements under these accepted. Excited utterance. Past recollection recorded. Oh my Lord, there's so much stuff. Look what is on this. It's our friend. Crazy out there. RB. This is on mine. Oh, see that it. Let's chat, period. What's a good time? All right, go ahead. Business meeting. Let me stop right there. Gossip or not Bourdain, okay, Masad. Gorilla Bob says the answer is every legal question is adult diapers. Depends. By the way, it's depend. Versus depends. Let me answer this. We're going to wrap this thing for you. It's always interesting when somebody comes forward and says, yes, I was there at the time. And I mean, also, some of our trial lawyers will tell you, why are you trying to bolster the credibility of a witness before anybody attacks it? I mean, it's not about you can't put somebody on and say, Your Honor, I'm going to put this witness on. Why? Well, to tell you that this is a great... you can't put somebody on to basically bolster the testimony of somebody else or their own when it's never been attacked, when it's never been called into question. Repeat. That is completing the question, completing everything. Before you go on and have people on, and I'm not going to mention names, people need to make their own mistakes. You tell me this is a Wild West show. This is still the nascent period of the citizen and civilian journalism. Number two, there are some rules. Yeah, maximum rules. There's also a real serious need to determine what the Louis Farrakhan just scored in Netflix. There you have it. If this is, and I'm sure it is cheap there, but this is the Obama version. All I'm saying is people have to be very careful when they're doing this. Very careful. Ask yourself, do you believe this? And also, look at the cumulative effect of something. And also, keep in mind this. Look at how what we talk about here permeates mainstream. That's why it's important. That's why their criticality is still there. They're the fire. They're that barrier that keeps this stuff from getting elsewhere. Chief Bear, thank you. Gorilla Bob, thank you. JSR, Eric, Thaddeus, Walters, Steam Donkey, one of the ones, thank you. Jennifer Small, per usual, incredible. Scott Gary, Counselor, thank you. Friends, Giannini, Leonardo, J9, Michael Cody, Lawrence Stahl, Michael Brennan, Carl Trena, Mahuko, Topieris, Superstar, Robert Eckert, thank you. Trina Love, thank you. Sergeant Rock, as usual, sir. Duck Dodger, Chronic Station, Michelle LaFlame, I love that name, LaFlame. Friend, Giannini, Leonardo Fitzwood, thank you. Tomboy Steve, Lorraine DeLello Utley, Rosie Rose, Greg Schultz, Chuck Cable, Gorilla Bob, and Jeremy Candle. Thank you immensely. 1 hour and 20 minutes. We're going to come back tonight, 7 p.m. Steam Donkey said, Gossip Lionel has a friend called RD, blah, blah, blah. Steam Donkey, I'm going to think about that very carefully. A Natural New Jersey, thank you. I want to know why you're natural. And also, at this particular time, we ask you to give your age and where you are now. Look at this, it's St. Petersburg. I take it, Florida. To find out, thank you, Quinn K. Find out where the demographics are, where the people are located, where you are. Because the permeation, the penetrability of this is something that is so phenomenal. It's not even. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention to detail. Remember, when we talk about these terrible subjects, it is my duty to talk about maybe the meta stuff, not necessarily the interstitial horrors, but to go deeper into maybe what the bigger picture is, so it's more palatable. Because I admit there is nothing more disgusting and hard than having to go through this and remind yourself that there are people in the world so disgusting, so beyond horrible, that they would even not only do this to a child, but think it's funny, and then defend it when Roseanne and others are thrown to the floor. All right, my friends, on behalf of the great donation, I say I should have developed. Remember, in this book that you this is when Howard Beale was being spoken to. He says, "You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, and I won't have it." Is that clear? You think you merely stopped a business? And ask yourself this whenever you wonder why Fox isn't talking about something. Do you think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. Here are part of the revolution is finding areas where the enemy has resided. Enemies and positions where the bad guys have hidden and been hidden for years. And that is the world of entertainment. That's a collective term, a broad term, a term that means a lot. And entertainment is, of course, television, movies, radio. Not so much. Radio's still trying to figure out. But my heart breaks. The radio was cutting it. The shock job. The Stern, the Howard Stern. Oh my God! Did you hear what he said today? Did you hear what he almost said today? It's gone. You want to hear stuff that'll freak you out? I'll give you the news. You want me to shock you? I'll tell you the news. I'll tell you stuff that's going on that you will vomit in the news or in certain parts of it. Think about that just for a moment, and then we'll move on. I want you to understand this. To show you how the platform has changed, and yet they don't. There was a time when Don Imus was considered shocking. Even tame when you hear what we've been acclimated to by virtue of new but also just the way we are. This morning I was in a hotspot. And I'm in the car, you know, and the driver of the car had on some morning show. Anyway, most god-awful girl laughing. Anyway, but they don't know. They still think you go to radio conferences, you go to NAB, and they go, wait. No, yet it's over with. It's over with. Podcasting now is certainly there, big time. Who was one of the original podcasters? That's right, you're looking at him. Then we go to TV news, CNN, Fox, the usual suspects. Are they important? Yes, very much important. To whom? To the usual suspects. To the usual folks who represent the usual factions and portions and usual news folks, the people who've always relied on this Les Moon vegetable. So big, because it's multiple. It's big because it's going to show you yet again a major cataclysmic sea change in the world of conventional media, conventional or archetypical media. And then something else would be different. And then you have the notion of the sex charges, sexual in this particular case. This is a very interesting one because of the fact that he admitted to some stuff. You know, normally they say, I did not do, I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone. Get out. How dare you? You know, that kind of thing. Well, he pretty much said, okay, maybe I was a little bit, which is odd. It's like, wow, it must have been far worse than it was originally portrayed. So that's now. Yet again, I can't even keep track. Can you? Think of how many people.
Okay, uploading.
What is it? I think 200, 500 people in the world of TV, movies, studios. 200. I can't. We cannot keep track because it's tumbling down. That's a great John Mellencamp put in tone. It is. It is cataclysmic. What's happening with that? So they're losing they're losing their touch. They're losing their control. They're losing their penetration. Plus they're losing some of their biggest names by virtue of it. And every now and then somebody like Tom Cruise. You know what? Good for Tom Cruise. Good for Tom.
I've had the longest
Impossible. Showing people he can still do it. You know the whole Harry Potter.
as blue as the sky is
Stuff that comes out that is still important, still big, especially international stages. So I'm not in any way saying that entertainment is done or movies are done. No. What I'm saying is this is representing,
I need a drink or two or three or four to spend any time alone.
Let me also tell you
with me
that there are other
every
levels
day,
of news,
a chance to change.
areas of subject penetration involving the world of
But the devil will find a way.
And people taking clues
As sure as the sky is gray,
pornography, child. That's the next
I'm gonna
of what really presents itself as completely destroying and imploding the power structure of what's going on. But that notwithstanding, do you see what's happening? And do you see how so desperately the professional left is scared because this was these various platforms and media. These were their propaganda arms and distribution centers. These were the folks who represent the means by which ideas and propagandized pith and hope and saccharine and anodyne type of messages. This is where it was presented. This is where propaganda was presented. They had it locked for years. Until brave, new, intrepid individual folks doing stuff kind of like that we're doing has raised the bar because they show a bravery and an aggressive take that is just monumentally impressive and non-paral. Nothing like it. Sui generis. It's raised the bar. This morning, I happened to listen to a little bit about Fox News had some. It was Fox and Friends. It was unwatchable. Even they are imploding under this insipid and vapid vacuity of that, which apparently seems to be. Many suspect part of this Disney Fox merger is kind of like a lighter, a dis-ailed or un-Roger Ailes-d version of this. It's kind of like this new version of Fox and Friends, more user-friendly, not as edgy, not as problematic. Now that, O'Reilly's gone and Roger Ailes is dead and things are, we'll let them talk, we'll let Sean talk about, and Tucker about certain things. We have Giuliani on 7,000 times a week. That's okay. But we're not going to get too. But other stuff is happening that is being presented by citizen and civilian journalists that are so good. From bedrooms, people wearing baseball cap backwards to a guy with a cat perched behind it. You name it. People in their cars. People with absolutely no reference to any kind of studio or schmaltz, providing some of the best, most earth-shattering news there is. Mrs. L was just reading some YouTube and recordings that were sent that are just incredible. I mean, seriously, incredible regarding pleas and people in the business who are being fired or charged or whatever. So let me recap. Mainstream media superstructure itself is being shattered. The Les Moonves loss. This is enormous. Les Moonves. This last little hiccup, kerfuffle, problem, accusation, speed bump, whatever you want to call it, has resulted in the most, billions lost, stock drops, BS. It's keep your eye on what's happening. Watch what happens also. And I also on Netflix. Who are these people coming on board? Part of apparently the Obama, kind of a side thing, who are certainly talented, but where is this money coming from? 100 million here, 200 million here, off of Netflix. Are these people making all this money with just the contributions from subscribers alone? There's no advertising. Where's this money come? I know this doesn't make any sense. Also, look at the idea of satellite radio, Sirius XM. Remember one thing: every car is every car. Satellite radio. And also Howard Stern. Got nothing but respect for him and Rush. Those two people saved and salvaged what was AM band. Listen to me, AM band. It's true. Absolutely true. But unless you want to hear, and what Howard Stern can do, which is very good, and that is provide famous people, celebrities and that sort of thing. But aside from the quirky, wild, wacky, shock jockey bits of yore, it's over with. You're going to see civilian, citizen stars elevate like you can't believe. We're also seeing bleed over. Just saw an interesting piece this morning from the radio. Trade journals and people. Hey, podcasting have been around for. They're finally embracing and they're saying, we do with podcasting. Well, it's not radio anymore if you grab podcasting. If you do podcasting, you don't need a signal for this. You don't need this. So they're capitulating. But the people that are going to be the new stars, the people are folks whose names you and I might know. But it's going to be the most rock'em sock'em news anybody's ever seen. And no matter how much people say they hate conspiracy theory stuff, whatever that means, people love it. No matter how much they say they hate it, they love it. And there are folks who are unbelievable. These are the most exciting times in the world of entertainment and information and in information. But take away from this is that the typical, prototypical left was the propaganda arm and the feeding system, feeding source, funding, but also people that crafted the message, pounded the message, held the message, feeded the message. All of these people were responsible for that. They're shattering. This is changing everything. And when Trump meets with Sulzberg, he basically says, stop calling it break. He's crying uncle. This is a tap out. You got him. Oh, these are great. Oh, these are great times. And the best part is, they don't even. All right, my friends, do me a favor. Please like it. Comments, observations, and subscribe to my channel. Please hit the little bell. Like videos and comment and see fit.
I don't think that I can.
I'm going to say something right now which I never thought I would ever say in my life. I vowed a while back, and now I vow never to make vows, but one of the vows I made was that I will never, under any circumstance, ever vote for a political party, or any candidate for that matter, for president. I voted for myself the last 2 times, and I will do it again. I swore, and I said this is ridiculous. This notion of the left-right paradigm, two sides of the same coin. Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, come on. What are you talking about? It's nonsense. This faux left and right. Donald Trump came along. And Donald Trump came along and started a revolution. And not only will I vote for him in 2020 if he decides to run, I can't, barring obviously something which don't even want to discuss it, but barring something cataclysmic in nature. But I'm going to also say something which I really, I mean, I'm going to say it to see if I don't throw up, because I'm going to give it a shot. I might very well vote in federal elections. Republican. Even though the last thing in the world I am is a Republican. Never, ever wanted to be a part of those godforsaken people ever. With their Reagan fetish and their, this close-minded Neanderthal. I thought of them what CNN views of, thinks of Trump. I did. And I think mine was warranted. One lunatic after another. One, because I came from a time where, growing up, in my formative years, when I first became aware of really politics in the 60s, I mean, I was a kid, it was Vietnam, and it was, you know, in 1969, Woodstock, I was 11, and that may seem like, well, it was a pretty hip 11-year-old. I remember the music at the time. And in high school, Vietnam was still going on, and it ended right at the time I would have been eligible for a draft had it continued. So I went through the period of time with Vietnam War and won, and the assassination. You remember them? MLK, RFK, JFK, Medvedev, go down the list, Malcolm X. This was my world, where civil rights were promoted by the Democrats. Women's rights, gay rights, social rights, legalization of marijuana, just profound changes in our society for the better were always that of the Democrats. And then, I don't know when it went crazy. I don't know what happened. Because John F. Kennedy, by the way, was a hawk. This guy was a dino, a Democrat in name only. And I don't know when it went nuts, but I don't even recognize these people. And I see one of the reasons perhaps to vote Republican is to continue the revolution, to continue a complete and total rupture, a fraction, the destruction of that which was the Democratic Party. They're off. I mean, they're just, I mean, somewhere, there's got to be some rational Republican out there. Just think when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the voice of the party, there's a Japanese word for four walls, or it's that psychotic Manson stare. I don't want to focus on look. There's a reason why crazy people get that look. There's something to be said for it. So she goes on for these incoherent, blathering bleats of prattling, I don't know what. And Joe Crowley, whom she beat, sounds like the biggest nut. He wants to what? Compensate people who illegally enter the country? I don't know what's going on. I mean, I don't know. Between that, her, close to Maxine Waters. No. The only way they are quashed, vanquished, liquidated, destroyed, ripped apart, ground into the ground, pulverized, atomized, and completely obliterated is for there to be more of a Republican movement. And states like New York and California, I may hold my nose, vote Republican, and then eventually vote back. Get them in, destroy what's left of the Democratic Party, maybe force them to return to what the Democratic Party was, to classic liberalism, Thomas Jefferson liberalism, FDR New Deal, not this faux socialist, pseudo, or as my friend says, pseudo Marxist ideology, which, by the way, is an economic theory, not a social theory, not one promoting tyranny and the like. So you heard it here first. I know for sure that I am so monumentally impressed with Donald Trump. Monumentally. Is he perfect? Not even close. Does he say some scary things? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Still want him? Still want him. Warts and all? Warts and all. His foreign policy? Incoherent. I don't know what he's talking about with Iran. I have no idea what he's talking about. I'll live with it. He wants to, what? Give drug dealers the death penalty?
I destroyed Charlie.
It's not going to happen, but I'll overlook that. He believes that Bashar al-Assad gassed his people, Ghouta, I guess, and Duma. Insane. I'll live with that. His Russian policy, incoherent. Schizoid. With all due respect and apology to schizoid, folks. I'm not even sure how that even works, but nonetheless. The Skripal poisoning case, insane. As Putin must have been to even do that. That story. Don't make me go through that again. It's just beyond. Jeff Sessions is Attorney General. Let's see, boss, education.
Okay, guys, one cast left.
What is happening here? I don't understand what he's doing regarding DOJ. Fire Rosenstein. No. Stop this. Stop this. And by the way, I don't want to see Alan Dershowitz on any TV shows anymore. I've had enough of Alan Dershowitz. He's on the Weather Channel, for God's sake. Enough with this book. I know you got a book. Why not vote? Don't vote for Trump. Okay. I promise I won't impeach Trump. Now go away. Please. Enough of you. It's the same thing all the time. My God, Dershowitz. Jesus, go away. Enough. Somebody different. Please. Please. I understand. You don't believe in impeachment. Got it. Go away. Write another book, maybe. Maybe an interesting book. Okay? That notwithstanding, I'll still vote for him for president. Yep. Still. God bless this man. He has rocked this world. Totally made the left wing go nuts. Crazy. Destroyed them. The media. Oh my God. He has caused people to go into paroxysms of complete and total insanity over the sight of this man. Love it. Don't get me wrong. Please let me live through another election night when I can watch the Cenk Uygurs and the Rachel Maddows and all these folks cry and scream. Maybe the young lady, was it Jessica Starr, the one who gave us that baleful yet pathetic howl, the one who waited for the cameras. You know who she is. She's the one who did the kind of like a Munch painting, or maybe Michael Corleone in that horrid Godfather 3, except it was a silent scream. Oh yes, Donald Trump. Watch what he does this time. And please, if there is a God, and you know how I feel about that. I tend to be a realist, but I might change my mind. If you can give me Hillary Clinton again, please, dear whoever, please. I want her to walk out in these increasingly horrid bedspreads she's wearing. It was the Mao jacket, then it was the Boston Whaler outfit, then it was the fire bunker gear, then it was the oven mitt outfit. Now she's walking around with she's wearing like hospital shoes. Kind of all she needs now is the Velcro old lady shoes, the bedspread, and the Life Alert pendant that she's now sporting. Please, dear God, let this be. Provided she's given a furlough after Trump indicts her and his Department of Justice indicts her very soon for the series of virtually unending charges that are most apropos and most available and most necessary in seeking justice once and for all for this termagant and this harridan and this scofflaw of the worst order and first stripe. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, thank you. Please like my video. Please put What your thoughts, comments, observations, witnesses, please. If you could, you would subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that bell so you can find a live stream. So you could also comment as you see fit. It's time right now. It's time. It's 12:08. It's the 30th day of July in the year 2018.
Hey, Alpha's under attack.
And we're doing this a little bit differently, and I'm going to turn this volume up just a tad. Just a tad. That's more like it. That's more like it. And we are ready to go, and I say to you a hearty hello and a hi-yo silver to everyone listening. Welcome to the Conspiratorium. Welcome to this thing that we do. Welcome to all of these moments, and there's so much for me to say, and I start off saying I have this list. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say that.
Welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by Emmy award-winning investigative journalists, Earth Files reporter and editor, Linda Moulton Howe, and world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters incident, John Burroughs. And now, leading off tonight's program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
7 years ago, on March 3rd, 2011, the British Ministry of Defence said it had transferred all of its UFO files to the UK's National Archives so the public could see them. But the very next day, on March 4th, 2011, BBC News in London reported it had gone through the 8,500 pages released by the MOD and, quote, intelligence papers on the December 26, 28, 1980 Rendlesham incident have gone missing. Officials found a huge gap where defense intelligence files should have been, close quote, BBC. That Rendlesham incident is where our Phenomenon Radio co-host John Burroughs was twice engulfed in mysterious lights back on December 26 and 28, 1980. Apparently, John was exposed to terahertz frequencies emitted by those UAP UFO lights, which damaged his heart and his mitral valve. After John survived open heart surgery in December 2013, he began filing Freedom of Information requests to the UK Ministry of Defence for documents from its UFO files. On February 6, 2014, he received a reply that said, quote, the MOD has endeavored to release all of its files containing UFO sighting reports to the National Archives. However, please note that there are 5 UFO policy files that have not yet been released by the MOD as follows, and then it lists them. One covering UFO reports from 1971 to 1996, and that should have included the December 26 to 28, 1980 world-famous Rendlesham Forest encounters, where RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge military personnel were involved seeing lights over 3 nights. That MOD letter to John Burroughs concludes, quote, these policy files originated in DI 55. The MOD is preparing these files for release to the National Archives in the near future, close quote. DI-55 is a highly secret and classified section of the MOD's Directorate of Scientific and Technical Intelligence within the Defense Intelligence Staff. By September 2014, not only had the MOD not released those 5 policy files, it admitted that it had withheld 13 other UFO-related files for a total of 18 still kept secret. Now it is July 2018, and the MOD has still not released 3 of those policy files. But our guest today on Phenomena Radio has also been filing FOIAs to the MOD since 2011 to get the 5 DI-55 UAP UFO policy files released to the National Archives. Last year, in 2017, 2 files were released, leaving 3 still withheld by the MOD. Then, to our guest's surprise, 7 months ago in January 2018, he received a complete set of the 3 withheld DI-55 UAP UFO files, with much blacked out. But what he could read provoked him to recently report, quote, "The files run to more than 2,500 pages, and some of the more sensitive papers declassified from secret have been heavily redacted. But what has survived the censor's pen paints a fascinating picture of the arguments that raged behind closed doors in Whitehall around the 50th anniversary of the UFO mystery in 1997, close quote." That writer and investigator is David William Clark, PhD, an investigative journalist and principal lecturer at Sheffield Hallam University in England. Dr. Clark acted as curator for the UK National Archives UFO project from 2008 to 2013. Since 1998, Dr. Clark has used the UK's Freedom of Information Act to gain access to closed UFO files held by the Ministry of Defense. His FOIAs resulted in the first releases of any information about the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, and a major breakthrough in 2001 when he was able to get information about the 1950 flying saucer working party that was used to brief Prime Minister Winston Churchill in 1952. That included a DI-55 intelligence study. Dr. Clark was able, in 2001, to get Churchill's original document and the related intelligence study released. Dr. Clark also is the one who got the 2006 unclassified release of the Defense Intelligence Staff's DI-55 report entitled UAPs in the UK Air Defence Region, Scientific and Technology Reports, also known as the Condign Report, that had been classified from 2000 to 2006 as secret UK eyes only. For this Phenomena Radio broadcast, Dr. Clark shared a few pages with John and me from the large batch he received from the MOD early this year. One page states, quote, "In recent times, the large deltas," and he's referring to the triangular-shaped UFOs, "seen over Belgium," and then there are blacked out words, and then it continues, "and the Rendlesham Forest landing, confirmed by the U.S. unit commander and others. These are probably the most interesting. In both cases, the UAPs apparently did not use any conventional propulsion system and could hover as well as move at considerable speed," close quote. After this short break, Dr. David Clark will join us on Phenomena Radio to let us see through his eyes what he has gleaned from the 2,500 pages of UFO policy files that the MOD is still withholding from the UK National Archive and from the world.
You're listening to Phenomenon Radio live on the KGRA digital broadcast station. Tonight's special guest, Dr. David Clark, We'll join the show right after these messages. Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio for tonight's interview with Dr. David Clark. To start tonight's interview, here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
David Clark, welcome to Phenomena Radio with John Burroughs and me. It is truly wonderful to have you on our broadcast today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, you have done some major work for a very long time in trying to access the same kind of secrets on the UK side that we have been trying to understand on the American side. And you and I and John know that the UK and the US have been working so closely together on unidentified aerial phenomena, whether they're called UFOs, UAPs, flying saucers, discs, or whatever. And one of the things that struck me when I was reading your most recent release, which I thought was excellent, about the work you've been doing behind the scenes trying to get the release of the last 3 policy files, and you're ending up getting the redacted pages that have not gone to the public yet. And when you wrote, the files run to more than 2,500 pages, and some of the more sensitive papers declassified from secret have been heavily redacted, but what has survived the censor's pen paints a fascinating picture of the arguments that raged behind closed doors in Whitehall around the 50th anniversary of the UFO mystery in 1997. Why that focus on 1997?
Well, two things I think there. First of all, there was a huge amount of media and press interest in the subject. As you will remember, 1996-97, there was, the release of Independence Day, the movie. There was the X-Files on TV over here in the UK. Huge amount of media interest, constant. I mean, I was working as a journalist at that time, so I was writing some of it. So that has an impact on the Ministry of Defence. They see this stuff, and they have journalists ringing in every day. So in addition to that, also in 1997, we had quite a seismic event here. We had the Labour government elected with Tony Blair as Prime Minister, and on the manifesto was the introduction of a full Freedom of Information Act. And that was quite something for a country like Britain, which is for many, many years still is, absolutely seems obsessed with secrecy. Everything is secret. We've got more material out into the open since the Freedom of Information Act, but it was a really big thing. So in 1997, a lot of these secret departments of the Ministry of Defence, it was dawning on them that at some point, and it took until 2005 for this to happen, that they would be subject to the new Freedom of Information Act. Now, there was a precursor to Freedom of Information called Access to Government Records, which began in 1994. So I started using that to request information well before we had the full Freedom of Information Act, and they were still deciding at that point which agencies would be subject to Freedom of Information. And for example, MI6 and MI5, which are the equivalent of your FBI and CIA, they were exempt. They argued that they should be exempt from the Act, and they were. But the Ministry of Defence intelligence staff wasn't. So they fell under the Act. And I think around 1997, 98, they came to realise this, and they realised that the game was up, and that they would have to do something with their spooky files.
But you still, what we learn is there was still tremendous interest on the part of some section of the MOD with alliance with the CIA, NSA, DIA, all of it in the United States on this whole issue of what is the propulsion system, how do they seem to neutralize gravity. There was a tremendous amount of interest always going from the 40s to right now about what is in these things, how do they do what they do, and in that context, you've already proven with all of your efforts to get some real documents out of the Ministry of Defense, including that 1952 document with Prime Minister Churchill. That showed that if he was given a flying saucer committee briefing, that Prime Minister Churchill in 1952 wanted to know everything there was about these so-called UFOs. Can you set the stage with what was happening then and what you learned in the document and that intelligence file then, and then we'll come forward?
Yeah. I mean, the famous Winston Churchill memo that reads something like, what's all this stuff about flying saucers? What is the truth? Let me have a report. I mean, that was one of the very first British government UFO documents that was released under the old Public Records Act, and it was released to the National Archives in 1986 under the old 30-year rule, because we used to have to wait 30 years even for the most mundane documents to be released. Now, the interesting thing about the Churchill memo, it effectively kicks off the modern interest, British military interest, in flying saucers as they were then known, before they became known as UFOs. And the interesting thing about that memo is the response that he got from the Air Ministry basically says that a full intelligence study was carried out in the previous year, and that it reached a set of conclusions, basically completely negative conclusions, that they were all misidentifications and hoaxes and that kind of thing, and that basically you don't need to worry about this, Prime Minister, and that we've had long discussions with our American colleagues, and they don't think there's anything in this subject either. But the problem is, when people in 1986 onwards then said, well, what was this intelligence study that was done in 1950, 1951? I was one of the people who contacted the records officer at the ministry and basically said, come on then, let's see, now we've got freedom of information, let's have a look at this intelligence study, the one that kicked off the whole British interest in this subject in the first place. And the response I got back was, sorry, we've done a search of our files, we can't find it, so we've got to assume it's been destroyed. And that threw people off the sort of trail of this thing, the scent of it, for a while. But being a good journalist, I'm like a dog with a bone. I won't let things drop. I wasn't prepared to sort of just go along with that, so I kept on their back. I got my MP involved. I just kept requesting them go back, have another look, and suddenly this missing destroyed document was found inside another file, and one day it just dropped through my letterbox in a brown envelope. There it was, the report that had been produced in 1951 by the Flying Saucer Working Party, which was set up, interestingly, by the Ministry of Defence's chief scientist at the time, Sir Henry Tizard, who was involved in the early development of radar in the Second World War, and he believed that flying saucers shouldn't be dismissed, should be properly investigated, and the Ministry of Defence set this study up. The interesting thing about it was, though, that the members of the study, and I interviewed the last surviving member of that study, who was still alive in 2000, I think it was, when I spoke to him. They were not really interested in the subject. They were basically asked to go and do this study because Churchill wanted it, or the Prime Minister of the time wanted it. And it runs to a mere 6 pages, and one section of it was withheld even then because they had to have a word with the CIA to see whether they could mention the words CIA. Again, going back to what you were saying about the the close working relationship. So that really was the start of all this, and I just thought, right, well, this is the start of it. I want to see all the other documents that have been produced, reports commissioned, etc., which began at this long 20-year paper chase that I've been involved in.
And look what you have come up with. If you take the 460-page Condign report and you parallel that to what you're saying was a 6 embarrassing pages of nothing that was handed over to Prime Minister Churchill, it means that between 52 and 2006, with the release, or at least changing from UK eyes only to unclassified on the Condign report, the DI-55 report, all of that contradicts really the dismissal in 52.
It does, but as with all these things, documents only tell part of the story, as you know. What you need to do is talk to the people who are actually involved in, who actually wrote these documents. And I remember at the time people saying, oh, how do you know this is even a genuine document? How do you know that someone hasn't just created it and sort of sent it to you to throw you off the off the trail. Well, I know it's the real document because I tracked down some of the people who wrote it who were still alive at the time, and listening to them talking about the circumstances. And although it was only 6 pages, the content wasn't actually worthless. In that, there was a very, very interesting close encounter in there that was detailed in some length. A RAF test pilot called Stan Hubbard, who was actually living in the United States in retirement until his death quite recently. His account of what he saw of Farnborough Airfield in 1950 was one of the few field investigations that they actually did, and they went into it in great amount of detail. He was interviewed, the whole story is in there, and it's an amazing story, and yet conclusions are completely negative. They just basically said he was the victim of an optical illusion.
Which, again, it's these policies of denial and dismissal that the subject matter doesn't deserve. Can you share with our audience what that phenomena experience was?
Well, he was a very experienced test pilot. One morning he was out on the airfield in Farnborough, and he heard like a crackling noise. He looked up in the sky, he got sunglasses on, and he saw a classic, as he described it, flying saucer. It was just there over the airfield, and he was desperately trying to find someone else to corroborate what he was saying, and he managed to find someone who was so terrified they just basically turned tail and ran. So he basically watched this thing, it hovered above him, he saw these sort of structures inside it and crackling noises and obviously emitting some kind of electromagnetic force. And it just vanished off into the sky, and he ran to report this thing. And he was interviewed by, how he described it, these spooky scientific intelligence people who turned up on the base and basically said he mustn't speak to anyone else about this at all, and that they thought that his sighting was one of the best that they've come across, and that they'd recently arrived back from South America where they'd been interviewing people. The interesting thing about this, about a month later, he was on one of the towers on the airfield with a group of other airmen, and lo and behold, this thing returned and started buzzing the airfield, and they all saw it in broad daylight. A big group of them, about 5 or 6, all senior officers. And again, they reported it. The scientific intelligence team, the Flying Saucer Working Party, trailed down to Farnborough, interviewed them all separately, told them not to talk about it, not to leak it to the press, and don't worry about it. We'll do a thorough investigation. The interesting thing is, Stan Hubbard heard nothing more about this for another 50 years when I phoned him and said, by the way, I've got the report of your flying saucer sighting here. Have you ever seen this? And he was absolutely flabbergasted, as you can imagine. In retirement, 50 years later, this thing lands on his floor, sort of his sighting basically dismissed in, I think it was 2 paragraphs, basically saying he was a victim of a optical illusion, and that the working party could not believe that in a air-minded area such as Farnborough, where there would be loads and loads of people out shopping and driving, that no one else other than him could have seen this flying saucer.
And David, doesn't that not underscore that no matter what layer it is in, since World War II, the United States, England, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, they have all been sort of bound together in a kind of brothers' agreement that when it comes to UFOs, that no one is to talk, which contradicts all of these reports, including the Blue Book dismissal, that underneath all of the so-called dismissals, those are like frosting on a cake to separate the public and the media from the fact that the governments are highly concerned about propulsion systems they do not understand and performances of 90-degree angles at 7,000 miles an hour that would kill a human.
Yeah, I think they are embarrassed about it. I think it's something they just don't want to talk about because they've got no reason to talk about it. It's not something that is a factor in their list of priorities.
But contact with other intelligences that are not human should be at the top of every country's priority list, shouldn't they?
Well, that's not for me to say, is it? It's for them to decide that.
David.
Yeah, John, I was just going to say, jump in here on this whole issue of UAP versus UFO.
Well, no,
the
but
terminology is interesting. The switch from flying saucer to unidentified flying object. In the first place, that was the British adopting the American terminology, and when they didn't like UFO, they decided to come up with UAP to replace
right, and
that.
I've got some questions about that, but I wanted to kind of expand on what you're saying here. Okay, in the files that you gave Linda for us to look at that you've been able to obtain, one of the discussions about doing the Condign report, which I don't know if the listeners are aware of, or a lot of them may not be, that you were actually the one that discovered the possibility of the Condign report and did FOIA and forced them to release it. I'm correct on that, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
That's what I said in my intro.
Well, I know, but I just wanted to reinforce it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. But there was this internal discussion, and what I think people will miss is this isn't questions being asked, but an internal discussion about how they needed to take a closer look at the UAPs. And I noticed then, this was prior to they finally changed their policy in 2000, policy files from UFOs to UAPs. The discussion was, the fact of the matter is that we know something's there. We're not totally sure what it is. And we can't go along the lines of it's no defense significance because of the same reason the Soviets, who were penetrating our airspace, even though they didn't attack us at that point, were a defense problem. And these very well could fall under the same issue. So we needed to dig deeper into this. And that was an internal discussion on why or why not they should do the UAP reports. So there were already people inside the DIS that already knew something was going on based on reports they had taken.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and there was what I would call an internal war going on between them and some of the other departments. Interestingly enough, the Secretariat Air Staff, the one that Nick Pope used to work in, they were the ones who wanted to shut the whole thing down. They just thought it was a complete waste of their time. But it was the DIS, as you correctly say, John, who were appreciated the situation, and they regarded the people in the Secretariat Air Staff as people they were just a nuisance. Basically, they say that they're not engineers. How can they make these statements to the public that there's no security risk from UFOs? How can they be so sure when we've never done a study? We've never had money to do a study, and that internal war, you can actually trace it all the way back 50 years to the time of the Flying Saucer Working Party, because then you had people like Tizard and Churchill, who sort of were inclined to believe something was going on, and you had the other scientists, Lindemann, Lord Cherwell, who just dismissed the whole thing as psychology, mass psychology, delusion, and they got the upper hand.
Well, I guess my question, David, is this: if you have something you can't explain, and it's clear within the Condign report, he doesn't totally identify what it is. That's been one of the biggest questions. But you have something that appears to be able to do the things this guy analyzed and reported on in the Condign report. Why wouldn't everybody inside intelligence and the MOD themselves want to know more about it to try to weaponize it?
A very good question. Yeah. Well, why wouldn't they?
So
I can't answer that, can I?
In John's question and your answer, which is universal.
I totally agree with John. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and it says that there is hard physical phenomena here, David, that governments, physicists, engineers recognized long ago, and they wanted it.
Well, I think the basic problem here, and I don't know whether this is the case in the USA, but it's certainly the case in Britain, is politicians and money. I mean, if you look at how much money they spent on the Condign report, £50,000. I mean, it's nothing. It's a drop in the ocean.
Right, but David, what stood out to me about this, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because you've analyzed these and seen more of these than I have, was this. Okay, you had people inside intelligence in the Defense Science Division realizing what they could do with this. There was an internal discussion on, do they do a report or not do a report? And unfortunately, I don't think there's anything dubious. I'm sure the document you sent us was kind of cut off on why they didn't want to do it. But my take on this was, did they decide to do this? Did they decide to bring a guy in, have him analyze some of this, to have a double-edged sword? Number one, to get more, to do a database is what they talk about, and put more of this together. Have him, because of his background, was technical and in EMP frequencies, to give them some more information, but at the same time then also kill the project technically by putting it out that they had, but they really weren't, along the lines of developing this technology, you know, and furthering this technology and being able to do it under the cover of the fact that they really did kill the program. There's nothing to it, but in reality there is. And what also stood out to me was, and there was a document in there talking about, it appeared about you trying to get these documents.
Yeah.
There also was a document stating that some of these documents that this guy that was supposed to do the analysis of the UAP were held back from him even.
That's correct, yeah. And I just think, to be quite frank with you, I think the Condine report is garbage. And the reason I say that is these files give the game away, because if you are doing a proper scientific report, you're investigating a research question, which is what my students do all the time. You don't set out knowing what the answer is going to be at the end. And basically he was told by his boss, go off, do this report, you can throw what you like into it, you know, we know you're interested in plasmas and that, off you go with that. We don't care what you put in it, as long as the main recommendation is that we can drop this subject once and for all and get out of this UFO UAP business. Now that is not the way you go about doing a scientific, open-minded report.
And David, didn't you say that the people who were working on the Condine report, DI-55, that some were told you don't do an independent investigation, you can refer to material that is already published?
Absolutely, yeah. This goes back even before the Condine report. The last proper field investigations they did, where they actually sent people out into the field to investigate, interview witnesses, which anyone who's had any dealings with ufology knows that is what you must do.
Yes.
The end of that, the last time they did anything like that was about 1968. They were all instructed, no, you mustn't on any occasions go out and speak to members of the public. So how can you study a subject like this on the basis of bits of paper? You've seen the standard report forms. The files are just full of them. They're just some bored RAF person who gets a call at 12:30 from someone who's seen a red light in the sky over Maidstone, and scribbles some bits and pieces down, files it with the UFO desk. That's what our man, Mr. Condine, was working on. He fed all that stuff into a computer. But what he was feeding, if you feed rubbish in, you get rubbish out. And that's what he got, because those sightings, none of them were investigated. They were all just raw material. And as you will all know, whatever you think about UFOs, if you look at the numbers of sightings, just about everyone agrees that 90 to 95% have got a down-to-earth explanation. I think that's one thing believers and skeptics will all agree on. Well, Mr. Condine was using all that material, including the 95%, feeding that into a computer. So garbage in, garbage out, and he did get a garbage answer at the end of it.
Well, yeah, but David, he did say that, and I don't have, unfortunately, the wording, some of the more important analysis in the report, but he did say that it possibly could have be intelligent in nature. It's able to do things that we don't have the capabilities of doing. And at the end, he said that we should further look into the military capabilities of it. So, yeah. Where did he grasp this?
Well, again, if you read the report carefully, right at the beginning, he says, I'm not going to let myself be distracted by getting involved in the UFO literature and reading UFO books. But as you know, John, because you've read through the report, that's exactly what he did. I mean, he acknowledges in, I think it's part 3 of the study, that he was reading books by Jenny Randalls. He was reading stuff by Paul Devereaux on Earthlight, so he contradicted his own terms of reference. So he was saying, I'm not going to get messed up with all this UFO industry. I'm going to keep myself in my little intelligence bubble and just look at the hard data. So he looked at the hard data and didn't actually find anything particularly interesting, so he went back to the UFO literature. And he was obviously aware of some of the more evidential sightings, such as the one of your own, but he wasn't allowed to go and interview anyone. He was strictly told, you mustn't spend any time on any of these well-known incidents, such as the Belgian case that you mentioned. No investigation was done. All they had were bits of paper. They were working from the same data that we're working from.
Which is incredible, but then how did he come up with Appendix F, as in Frank, that is titled Potential Mental Effects on Humans? And this is that section, an appendix of the big Condign report that says, quote, the well-reported Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters event is an example where it might be postulated that several observers were probably exposed to UAP radiation for longer than normal UAP sighting periods, which implies that they have some kind of range based on other cases. And he said there may be other cases which remain reported. It is clear that the recipients of these effects are not aware that their behavior perception of what they are observing is being modified by these frequencies from these UAPs. The E field strengths, which are known to affect the brain, are of the order of 50 multivolts per centimeter at between 1 and 100 megahertz, and experiments have shown that effects can be produced at levels of 10 to the 7th and 10 to the 8th volts per centimeter. And then there is this drawing of a human male and showing different distances of impact by the frequencies that we now know are terahertz. Where did he get this material?
Well, it's all listed in the report. Most of it was from Russian sources, where they'd been experimenting with these plasmas.
Okay, so
some of it classified, some of it open source. And a reading of the UFO literature, because again, he'd obviously read some of Jenny Randall's books, and Jenny's main thesis is exactly that. That some of these UFO sightings are encounters with what he calls atmospheric plasmas. He uses virtually the same phrase that Jenny uses.
But atmospheric plasmas are associated with an advanced technology by, we'll call them advanced intelligences, because that's what government agencies here use. And that the whole implication of this report being written by a man you know who he is, can you at least describe some of his background?
Yeah. I'll read you what I've been able to find. I do know who he is, but I'm not going to say his name because he's currently in his mid-80s, and I don't want him. I don't want to invade his privacy. That's the bottom line. And I do have. Some people may say that journalists don't have any ethics at all, but I do have a few. And what I've been able to discover, though, is that he's a retired RAF pilot, an intelligence officer, and he flew top-secret missions during the Cold War. His expertise lies in electronic warfare, radar, air defense, guided weapons. So if you look at that list, that made him the absolute perfect candidate for the MOD's real UFO expert. He was their expert, and he was someone that they drafted in every now and again when they needed an opinion on one of the puzzling incidents that were reported to him, and that may explain why he's familiar with the Rendlesham Forest incident. I know that during the 1980s he advised on the sensor aspects of the Pentagon's Star Wars missile program, and until his retirement he worked for GEC Marconi, which is the premier electronics company in the UK, now part of BAE Systems.
Right.
According to his own published biography, and I'm dropping a lot of hints here for people out there, you can find that you can go and do a bit of detective work, people listening. You may be able to find who I'm talking about. For the whole of this period, he was also a consultant analyst to a department in the MOD.
David, this is what I want to do. Linda, I want to bring this up because this is important.
Yeah, but just one thing before, and that is, David, he had his own UFO encounter.
He did. There is a reference. There is a reference.
Right. But David, here's the thing, okay? Which I'm sure you're aware of by now, that his work basically tied into what was taking place right outside the Woodbridge back gate.
What? Yes, I agree.
Everything that they were working on at Bowsey, Martlesham Heath, and other locations, including EM free frequencies, plasmas, Star Wars lasers, satellites, was what he worked on. And he may very well been out working on those projects right outside of Bentwaters.
I wish you could talk to him.
And my point is then if you go back to what he said about UAP radiation, he is tying possibly in his own work and what they were working on, including what Andrew Pike talked about, which I'm sure you've read his book or heard of his book, where they were actually investigating a phenomenon that's in the area of those facilities.
Quite, that's a possibility. I'm not going to speculate. All I know is what I know.
And John, I understand why he's urgent to put that in at this point, because it does tie it together. But could you explain what this man, with all of this expertise, the overseer of Project Condign, he had his own UFO encounter? Can you explain?
He did, yeah. And it's mentioned in one of the first documents that he writes when he gets the contract to do the study, and he's looking at all the material that he's been presented with, and he's trying to make sense of it, and he realizes that basically his main data are all these report forms, thousands and thousands of them, and anyone who's waded through some of this material that's been put on, released by the National Archives, will be familiar with those like standard forms that the MOD used to use. And he actually says it needs rewriting because the data that is requested in those different categories on the films isn't what I need to do this study. He says that himself, and he says, I know this because I filled out one of these films myself after a sortie in the 1950s when I saw an unexplained aerial phenomenon myself. But that's it. It's tantalizing, it's dropped in there. He never makes any reference to it again elsewhere in the files.
But he was both a first-hand experiencer of being a pilot who has an encounter with something that falls into the UFO category and that he cannot explain what it is doing. And he ends up being the arc of the mind who goes into all of these other areas. And then what John is bringing up could be at the heart of some kind of a focus by an advanced intelligence in that Bodsey Bentwater area because of what the governments of the UK and the US were doing.
Well, again, that's speculation, and I can only tell you what I know from what it says in the documents and from what these people I've spoken to tell me.
David, the reason why I find this even more intriguing is this. I got to sit down with General Williams on more than one occasion, and I don't know if you followed his background after he left Bentwaters, but one of his jobs after he left, besides going to Ramstein, was he ended up at Norton, and Norton was the technology command for the United States Air Force at that point. So he oversaw this technology, and when I had a sit down with him, I brought down the Condign report and that part of it, and he read it, and he looked up at me, and his eyes were kind of wide open. He says, I never thought this would see the light of day. And he said to me, he says, well, do you have any questions? And I said, let's go into these frequencies. And he looked at me and he said, these frequencies, I'm a fly-by-wire type of guy, so I don't know what you want to know from me on these. And I said, well, I talked to you earlier in your degrees in engineering, so you obviously know more about this and how they tie into all this. And his comment was, a question time is over, what can I do for you? So I'm not trying to say these are aliens. And I understand what you're saying, that it's speculation, okay? So I get that, I get your point, and I understand you better than I ever did based on the research I found out you've been doing behind the scenes. But it does seem to me that two things stand out about this. A, these frequencies are important, which do involve military technology. And B, that seems to be, because you wrote in that article about a D notice, that the MOD seems to want to hide what they've learned about this technology and how they can use it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a whole another area that we can talk about. You know, the fact they do want to hide it, and they've done it in two ways. I mean, Ian Cobain, the Guardian journalist, he wrote a book a couple of years ago called The History Thieves, and he wasn't talking about UFOs particularly. He was talking about all the other documents files about Britain's colonial past, about nuclear accidents, etc., etc. And there's a link between all these things, and what they've done is they've deliberately destroyed documents. They've made it so that people who know about some of these things can't talk to the media. They threaten them with the Official Secrets Act, and often it's about things that shouldn't be kept secret, that no reason to be kept secret, but it's just this obsession that we have in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in the USA, that people shouldn't be told about things that have been done in their name, and I think it's appalling and disgusting, and that's why I do what I do as a journalist. And like you say, John, a lot of it I don't make a big deal about it. I just get on with it, and when I actually find something, I drop it into the public domain and let other people do the speculation.
It's erasing history and reconstructing it by power brokers that in their own interests currently.
Yes, exactly, and it's erasing history. The very fact that this chap that we're talking about, the author of the Condign Report, I suspect he would like to talk about this, but I'm absolutely 100% certain that he's been told not to. And very soon, given his age, he won't be around to talk to anyone, so we won't be we won't find out anything.
Well, David, really that brings up another parallel to Rendlesham, okay? And I want to bring up Nick's name because you sent me 3 different documents that talk where there was an internal discussion about Nick Pope, okay, from inside the MOD, to include, it appears DIS was being questioned by somebody who's completely blacked out, and they said that they felt that Nick was quite, fond of this individual and looked up to him. But then they went on to say this, which has always been something that I didn't know about, and I found out through research myself, was this. They felt that in Nick's book, which they joked is fiction, but they said the person he identified as Deep Throat could be Nick's father. Now, what most people don't know is Nick's father was in charge of the scientific person in charge of the technical division of the MOD at the time of the 1980 incident.
Right.
Yeah, most people don't know that because, strangely, Nick has never mentioned it.
Well,
I wouldn't know why.
Right, I only found out about it because I did some research back on who was in charge of the scientific area at the time. So I guess my question to you is, based on the documents I've just read and some of your research, it appears that these documents act like Nick could be going rogue, and 2 of them were pre-Condign, and they were concerned that he was leaking out information about the scientific report, and that some of Nick's knowledge may very well have come from his own father's work, to include what went on at Rendlesham.
Well, the thing about his father, for starters, is actually mentioned in John Alexander's book on UFOs. I don't know whether you've read that. There's a chapter in there on British government interest in UFOs. I'm not sure when that was published, but it does actually mention this connection in there. And my reading of the 2 documents that you're talking about, they do mention his father, the deputy chief scientist or whatever he was, but the person that they are talking about, who they think is his Deep Throat, so he liked to see himself as a character from the X-Files at that time, was the DI-55 wing commander, who is the same person who pretty much got the Condign study commissioned, who was definitely someone who thought that something was going on, and it's most of his material that is in these DI-55 files. He is the one who pushed this through. He is the one who tried 2 or 3 or 4 times during the mid-1990s to get this commissioned. Nick Pope isn't even in the loop. I know he's written himself into it now, but it's quite clear he knew nothing about this. I mean, these things are done in little compartmentalized bubbles, and once he'd left the Secretariat Air Staff in 1994, he had no knowledge or connection other than perhaps what he heard on the grapevine about what was going on with the Condign study. So I think all this stuff about what did you know, etc., it's complete waste of time even going there, because he didn't know anything about it. He didn't know anything about the Flying Saucer Working Party report. When I met Nick in 2001, the first time I met him to interview him, I actually had a copy of the Flying Saucer Working Party report in my bag. and I was asking him about it, and he didn't have a clue what I was talking about.
That's fair, but I guess what my point is this, okay? And I can't prove or disprove this, but Nick said he was part of the reason why Condign was done. But Nick makes these little innuendos all the time that stood out to me even somewhat in these documents, because one of the things they talked about was the X-Files. And I know there was a hint later about maybe his own book and Deep Throat and all this other stuff. But you go back to Nick and saying there's no UFO in the smoke in the hangar yet. There's no smoking gun. But there's so many other things that fall under the possibilities. So I guess where I'm going with this is if Nick, you know, and it's obviously, he said he doesn't want to, you know, bring his father into this as little as possible. But if Nick was, over the years growing up and even early on in the MOD, gleaned some knowledge from his father and the technology they were working on, which would include possibly UAPs, because his father was in charge of technology, and all that was being worked on outside Woodbridge Gate in 1980. I mean, you know, involving even the possible testing of UAPs. That's what Andrew Pike said was going on. They were doing the report and work on UAPs at the time, right outside the gate, you know, whatever the phenomenon was that was there. Then Nick would have some knowledge about some of this, but like you said, he was out.
Why don't you ask him?
Well, that's the problem. Like, what I'm trying to get at is I never get a straight answer, but I mean, based on...
Exactly.
But what I'm trying to get at is you. My question to you was not so much about Nick, but what do you really think happened in Rendlesham Forest based on these new documents, the research you've done? And my other question is, you got Condign out, so you knew about that reference to UAPs in it. Why did you never bring that up, you know, to the public? Because you did show interest in Rendlesham.
Well, you've got to understand that it's, how many pages in the Condign? 460 pages?
Yeah.
That reference to Rendlesham is one paragraph in the entire study. You know, and the amount of other material that's in there, when the Rendlesham thing is already quite well known. I mean, it's important to you, John, and I understand why it is, but there's a whole bunch of other UFO experiences in there as well that are equally interesting. And my priority is getting the documents out, getting them published, finding out what else they've got, and it's not concentrating on any one particular incident or speculating about things that may or may not have happened. You know, I mean, I spend most of my days, I mean, I don't just make freedom of information requests on UFOs, I do it on a whole range of things. I'm pumping them out virtually every day of the week. So, you know, I follow the scent, I follow the paper trail. I get one document and it gives me a clue about another document.
Right, but then what I think part of why I'm asking this is this. In it says UAP radiation and to higher levels than back are normal. Why would that not be itself a FOIA? Where did he base this off of?
Yeah, but you say that, but if you actually look at the conclusions, which I'm currently holding here, the UAP executive summary, point 15, it actually says that they haven't found any evidence of any no artifacts of unknown or unexplained origin have been reported or handed to the UK authorities despite thousands of UAP reports. There are no signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, or radiation measurements, and little useful video or anything else. So
David,
in conclusions, saying there are no radiation measurements of any significance. So whatever he says in volume 3, he contradicts in his actual summary.
Well, David, isn't that summary just like the phony asbestos destruction of documents excuse that you've received? That there are these tripwires throughout the CIS and the CIA, and they have, like, you explain how you were told, number one, that the Prime Minister Churchill original document had been destroyed, and then you found out that that wasn't true. Well, what did they say about these other policy files for a while?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, this is the monster that all of us are struggling with, all of us who are doing investigative work. I mean, you either see it as a conspiracy that there's someone there who knows about all this, who's actively throwing all these things into the mix to throw us off the scent, or there's the other theory, which is the one I subscribe to, is that the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing, that the entire thing is a cock-up, that no one knows anything about anything. They're all desperately trying to cover their own backs and not cause embarrassment to their minister, whoever that is at the time. And certainly they don't want to draw the attention of the media and people like me to what they're doing secretly. So there are many different ways to interpret these contradictions and problems that are thrown up by the documents and by what these people say. So you either believe in a conspiracy, or you believe that there's something going on, but it's not necessarily someone behind it who's piecing all these things together. And my conclusion is, I just know how the British establishment works, and I think they'd find it impossible to conceal something of this magnitude.
But if you hold back documents, and I'm asking this, if you hold back certain documents, this guy what we needed to put the conclusions together, number one, how can you make a justifiable conclusion? But also, wasn't told at the end just to write up it so it looked like the place was closed, but we still wanted to investigate more. And what I didn't know until tonight he told me was his background in all of the technology stuff.
Yeah.
So he would have been basing some of his references and what he knew based on his own investigation and work on technology itself, which again doesn't tie back to what is it alien or not? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think you've got a point there. I think he was basically told, just go away and write something. We don't care what you do with it, but just make sure that the end result gets us out of this business. It's embarrassing, it's costly, we don't want anything more to do with UFOs. And I think rather cleverly, because he had all this knowledge that you're talking about, I think he's put that in there. He didn't need to, but maybe that's some kind of message that he's putting out, that, there is something to this, and it is something to do with electromagnetic radiation or whatever. So maybe he's fulfilled what he had to do for the contract that he was given, but he put all this stuff in that you are very rightly focusing upon. He didn't need to, and I think there's got to be an explanation as to why he decided to do that, because he could have just written a completely negative report, much like the Flying Saucer Working Party, just 6 pages, basically, this is a load of nonsense. And his bosses would have been satisfied, but he didn't, did he? He produced a 4-volume, 463-page monster, all full of this material which won't go away.
Which I think people need to understand, David, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I read behind it was this was never supposed to be released to the public. But because of your work and you caught something about a report, you forced their hand on it.
I did, yeah. I mean, I'm always on the lookout for this kind of thing, and because I was going through all the documents that were being released, not just the ones under FOI, but the ones that were releasing at the National Archives during the 30-year rule, I was going through them forensically, and it was by doing that I came upon references to this study, and that some work had been done, and immediately I waited until the first day the Freedom of Information Act came in, the 1st of January 2005. It's there.
So needed that on target is not there.
In those files that have been released, and if you trace it back, you see where I put that request in for the Condign study. Unfortunately, the person who was the desk officer at the time, Linda Unwin, who I got to know quite well, she was quite sympathetic. She wanted to get this report out as well, and she basically said to me, we need to get everything that's surviving on this subject out, trace it back.
We're about to go to our first break, but I want you to consider this. Maybe we can breach it when we come back off the break. But let's say the ending was written differently because it was for UKI, secret only, never supposed to see the light of day. And when they realized that you caught them in a lie, and they had a report, and Nick had been hinting about that possibly down the line, right? They altered the ending of the report, and then they went about closing down the UFO desk afterwards. Is that a possibility? And I'd like to take that up. Okay, but I'd like to hear your reason why you don't think so after the break.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Linda, John, and David. Welcome back to Phenomenon Radio, live right here on KGRA Digital Broadcast Station. Before we begin hour 2 of our interview with tonight's special guest, Dr. David Clark, it's time for the news, Brought to you by earthfiles.com. Here's Linda Moulton Howe. Linda?
On July 25th, 2018, there were headlines around the world about the discovery of a lake of water found by radar a mile below the Martian South Pole. Water could mean extraterrestrial life there as well, even if only microbes. This exciting news came from an investigation by the European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter, flying over the Martian South Pole and beaming down radar signals from its Marsus radar instrument aboard. The radar signals are color-coded in the gray square that they have put out to show the signals that they got, and they had a lot of blue, both dark and light. Those blue colors correspond to the strongest reflections, which are interpreted as being caused by the presence of water. ESA scientists report in the recent journal Science that an underground lake of salty water 12 miles across, that's 20 kilometers, and a mile down, that's 1.5 kilometers, beneath the South Pole could be 3 feet deep. A 12-mile lake, 3 feet deep. Robert Orsi, PhD, astrophysicist at the Italian National Institute for Astrophysics and leader of the Marsus project, explains, quote, "In the blue colors, you can see where the reflections from the bottom are stronger than surface reflection. This is something that is, to us, a telltale sign of the presence of water," close quote. Another scientist, Bruce Campbell, PhD, of Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, oversees a different instrument called a SHARAD, Shallow Subsurface Radar, on NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Professor Campbell says, quote, "We don't see this reflector that has been reported by ESA's Marsus radar," close quote. Well, the reason might be that SHARAD uses different wavelengths that are scattered by the Martian South Pole ice before they get down a mile, where the Marsus radar can more clearly see. Professor Jack Holt at the University of Arizona also points this out. Quote, "A brine, that's salty water, is probably the strongest radar reflector that you can come up with aside from metal. A lake would mean a smooth, mirror-like reflection that is more likely to show up in SHARAD, but if it is saturated sediments, it could be a rougher surface, and then that would be easier for the SHARAD to miss," close quote. Wherever there is water on Earth, there is almost always some life form, small and large. Could underground water at the Martian South Pole finally be the place where we're going to get that global headline that other life has been found beyond Earth? Manish Patel, PhD, senior lecturer in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics at the UK's Open University, says, quote, "We are not closer to actually detecting life, but what this finding does is give us the location of where to look on Mars. It is like a treasure map, except in this case, there will be lots of X's marking the spots," close quote. Mark Sefton, who researches life in extreme environments at Imperial College London, told UK's The Guardian that the water being so far under the surface of Mars was not in itself a problem for life. The surface of Mars is bombarded by intense radiation that effectively sterilizes the surface. So if life lurks anywhere on the red planet, it is likely to be underground. As long as there is an energy source to exploit and a source of nutrients or raw materials, then life is possible, close quote. Some scientists have wondered if a new rover could be launched soon to the Martian South Pole to drill down as deeply as possible with technologies sensitive to the presence of water. But astrophysicist Roberto Orsi cautions, quote, "Getting there and acquiring the final evidence that this is indeed a lake will not be an easy task. It will require flying a robot there, which is capable of drilling through 1.5 kilometers of ice, which is a mile down. This will certainly require some technological developments that at the moment are not available, close quote. It was only 2 months ago on June 7, 2018, that NASA held a live streaming press conference to announce that the Curiosity rover on Mars has confirmed both seasonal methane and organic molecules of methane. The Curiosity rover dug down 2 inches into the Martian soil of Gale Crater on the red planet's equator, where water once flowed in such abundance that it carved channels in the 3-mile-high Mount Sharp at the center of the crater and the crater walls. That is why Gale Crater is a logical target to look for signs of life, past and present. And the fact that Gale Crater had running water some 3 billion years ago means that the recent discovery of these organic molecules and methane reinforces the expectation that some kind of life did exist on Mars. Combine that with a lake 12 miles wide underneath the South Pole. Next up, in 6 months on November 26, 2018, NASA's InSight lander that was launched on May 5th, 2018, will land for a 2-year mission to search for evidence that NASA describes as, quote, geologically alive on the surface or below the surface, close quote. And that's looking for life on Mars. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earth Files news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and Real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news brought to you exclusively by earthfiles.com. And now, back to the interview. Here's John Burroughs. John?
Thanks, Bill. David, before we went to break, I asked you a question I'd like to expand a little bit more on before you answer it. Mr. Condyne, as we've had to identify him as, was picked to write a report, okay? He had an extensive background in technology and was a pilot. It appears that he worked on quite a bit of technology, maybe even possibly just outside the gate at Woodbridge Air Force Base, okay? He puts this report together, all right? It was clear that this report was never supposed to see the light of day, all right? In the report, he goes into these different possibilities about what they're dealing with, what it could be, how it could be, utilized, should be evaluated further for military usage. Then he closes with a different type ending. As you said earlier, what he said at the end contradicts some of what he may have said during the report, and why would he do that? Is it possible, and I say only because of some of the other things the MOD has done, to include the fact that it appears they've held back certain documents from him in the first place to be able to do a full report anyway. Is it possible that, and I had some inside information come to me a while back saying that some of that report may have actually been held back. Is it possible they altered the ending knowing that the fact that it was now going to see human people were going to be able to see it, and the whole plan of the report originally was whether or not they should continue the investigation, which we discussed earlier. Why would they want to end investigating something they can't explain and could be used in military technology? What say you?
Well, he does actually say, I think it's in volume 1 of the report, right at the end, that he thinks that it should be published and made available to the public.
Okay. And, I mean, what about where I'm going with this, the whole way it was handled, the MOD, at the end being forced to release it because of you? And could they not have altered some of it, or had it altered a different type of ending based on the fact that they decided, well, this is definitely becoming a headache now because there's more and more questions coming in, and we can use this now, especially with the ending we have, to end the UFO project.
Yeah. I mean, when you say it was altered, I mean, the report, if you follow the whole sort of paper trail right back to when it was first commissioned about 1995, way back then, if you look at the terms of reference, they were completely different in 1995 to what he eventually ends up with in 1996, and he actually explains that in the same letter where he talks about his own personal sighting, because what originally DI-55 wanted a much larger, more widely extensive terms of reference. They were obviously, all these people, they're all wanting money from the pot. You know, there's all the different parts of the Ministry of Defence, all sort of like having to make a pitch for money for their own particular projects. And so originally they wanted to do a more thorough study where they would be looking at specific incidents, but at the end of the day it got kicked back about 2 or 3 times, and the amount of money that they were actually allocated was a tiny fraction of what they originally wanted. So obviously the report was altered before it was even written. And when you follow the paper trail in the files that I've just been working through, it's quite obvious that he was told right from the very beginning when he was starting, whatever you do, all we want to see at the end of it is that the I-55 should be able to delete the subject of UAPs from our task list, and that's what he did. So if you want to interpret that as it being altered, then yes, I suppose it was altered in terms of the fact that if he hadn't been told that had to be his conclusion, he would probably have reached a completely different one.
And
But also, one other question, Linda, one other follow-up. Why the change, do you think, from 96, 2000 prior, it was all UFO files, but 2000 forward, they changed their policy files to UAPs?
Well, again, you can see when you get to see the paper trail, it's quite obvious that the Defence Intelligence staff had been using that particular acronym, UAP, for many years, at least from the 1980s. You can trace it way back, and it was a way of evading having to answer queries from people asking about UFOs. Because, for example, if I'd written into the Ministry of Defence in the 1980s and said, what is the Defence Intelligence staff got on the subject of UFOs, they could legitimately turn around to me and say, which they wouldn't have to because there was no freedom of information, but they could say, we don't have anything on UFOs, and that would be a true answer, because they don't use the phrase UFOs, they use UAPs. So there's a way of hiding information in plain sight.
And David, in following up what you and John have just been talking about, it was only approximately 4 weeks ago on July 1st, 2018 in the Sunday Express that there was this excellent interview with you by Mark Brannigan. And in here you are quoted, Dr. Clark said, the MOD have been desperately trying to delay the release of these formerly secret and highly sensitive papers for more than a decade. Even though they have been partly censored, they cannot conceal the fact that the UK military were interested in capturing UFO technology, or what they coyly refer to as, quote, novel weapon technology, close quote.
Absolutely, That's there in the files. That's what we wanted to do. Which does seem a very strange decision then to say, right, well, we want to delete this subject entirely from our task list.
Yeah, and
perhaps they captured one in the meantime.
I'm sure that they had all kinds of things behind all these denials, and then the next paragraph. And the files, we're talking here concerning Condign, and what you've seen in the policy files that they released to you in redacted form. And the files, this is you talking, and the files reveal they were desperate to capture this technology wherever it came from before the Russians or the Chinese got hold of it first.
Yes. Yeah, and they seem particularly worried that the Russians and Chinese were far ahead of them in their in the research they'd been doing, and there are references to way back mid-1990s to what they'd call, quote, an informal group within the US intelligence community that was working on this subject, and that our DI-55 wing commander had actually met them on a trip to the USA. So, really? Yeah, so whatever's behind this new study that's been revealed, the Pentagon one, there was obviously something going on in the mid-1990s as well.
Oh, you mean the ATIP, I'm going to give the title that the New York Times ran with on December 16th, 2017. It was Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
I hate these acronyms.
Well, what's interesting is the New York Times had aerospace on that day, but Politico was given by the releasers advanced aviation, and then the Washington Post was given advanced aviation. There you have three mainstream releases, one of which is different from the other two. The New York Times getting the correct one, which I understand advanced aerospace is the correct one. But you have muddying the waters in the release to three prominent press agencies right there to have people argue about, which then reduces the credibility of the content.
Well, these are the games these non-people play, aren't they? I mean, it's basically stalling. It's putting... It's hoping that people will go off the set. I mean, particularly with journalists, as you know, we've all got deadlines. If they can stall, if they can sort of drag it out so that people lose interest and move on to something more interesting like Brexit or something, that's what they'll do. And going back to what you were saying earlier about what some of the Express mercenaries are saying about the fact that they were desperate to sort of hang on to these files. I mean, you've seen the email trail that I've sent you.
Yes.
Which I don't know how many pages it drags on to. It goes all the way back to 2011, and there's an equally long one going back from 2011 to 2007. And as you can see from that, I just would not let the matter drop. They were constantly coming up with excuses as to why they can't release these files. I mean, in all the dealings I've had with government bodies, I have never experienced something as long drawn out, as duplicitous, and as dishonest as that. Because on at least two occasions, they actually sent the files to Q to the National Archives. And for some reason, the National Archives then sent them back to the Ministry of Defence. So every time I was contacting one party or the other, they were just passing the book and saying, oh, well, sorry, you need to speak to the Ministry of Defence. All right, no, you need to speak to the National Archives. And this charade carried on until I threatened to take them to the information.
And they probably did that on purpose.
Well, undoubtedly, yeah, because they just thought, well, maybe he'll fall off a cliff or he'll get distracted by something else in the
David, I want you to reiterate something because I want to make sure I heard it right.
John, just hold 1 second here. And this is where, David, you also were told that when you inquired about the Rendlesham Forest incident, that you were told that those documents that were disappeared, that have been missing out of the 8,500 that the BBC said that all these files about Rendlesham had gone missing, you got back an answer that it was asbestos.
Well, I knew they were missing long ago, long before that. Because basically DI-55 had two sets of files. They had the reports files that dated from, I think, 1967, when they were given responsibility for this subject by the Air Ministry, because the Air Ministry was abolished in 1964, I think it was, and all their intelligence section was transferred into Defence Intelligence. So that's when DI-55 first got the gig, so to speak, and it's one that they didn't want. And all through their history, they regarded the whole thing as a nonsense. So they had this set of files, policy files, which are the ones that you're talking about, and they had reports files as well. They are the really interesting ones, and very, very few of those have survived. So it turns out that when Mr. Condine was told to go and do this study, he was given access to these what were then top secret documents in the basement of the old War Office building in London. That's where apparently this asbestos contamination was suddenly detected. Now, if that was the case, then Mr. Condine and all the record reviewers themselves would be contaminated by asbestos. But he found to his horror when he got down there that everything before 1975 had been destroyed. So all the reports files dating back to 1967 are missing, and all he could find was a scribbled note basically saying they were sent to archives in 1984 and marked as destroyed on the orders of a senior defence intelligence official.
Which
no
not...
reason why, but obviously they saw the whole thing as embarrassing. And people in those positions, from what I understand, the attitude is, We've got a whole bunch of files here, and you've got to remember also that this is before we had electronic storage. And we've got huge numbers of paper files and nowhere to store them. What tended to happen before freedom of information was someone would just say, do we need these files on UFOs anymore? Nah, not interested in the subject. Let's put them in an incinerator. And that decision is taken at quite a low level in the hierarchy. It doesn't necessarily have to come from above. If someone just thinks the whole subject is nonsense, and a lot of people in the MOD do think that, they would think, why do we need to have all these filing cabinets full of these reports of lights in the sky? You know, we need to get rid of them so we can use the filing cabinets for something else.
But David, we have had the same parallel in Roswell. Remember when the CIA tried to get away with explaining them as wooden dummies the third time around that had been dropped so they could explain the bodies? And CBS News did some research and found out that no wooden bodies had been dropped anywhere in the Roswell region until sometime in the 50s, could never have explained 47. Well, it was Congressman Schiff from New Mexico who then went to the GEO and said, I want to have an investigation, and then what comes back? It sounds exactly like the UK. We're sorry, sir. All of the documents in 45 to 49 were destroyed without permission, they said.
Yes. Yep. Well, I just think it's actually quite amusing that the greatest mystery in the history of humankind, some records officer somewhere has thought, no, chuck it in the bin. I've got here what I think is the most interesting document of all. This is my favourite, which is what I found in this set of files, and it's written by our friend, this mysterious DI-55 wing commander, and basically it dates from about 1995, and it's about that time that they actually officially admitted that DI-55 even existed, because if you remember, even before that, they were actually removing the phrase DI-55 from documents they released to ufologists because they didn't want to admit this organization even existed. Well, this person writes to his opposite number, which would have been Nick Pope's successor, Kerry Philpott, in the Secretariat Air Staff. He says, I see no reason for continuing to deny that the Defence Intelligence Staff has an interest in UFOs. However, if the association is formally made public, then the Ministry of Defence will no doubt be pressurised to state what the intelligence role or interest is. This could lead to disbelief and embarrassment, since few people are likely to believe the truth that lack of funds and higher priorities have prevented any study of the thousands of reports received. And that was written in 1995, just before the Condign study was commissioned. And someone has written in the margin in pencil, ouch, with an exclamation mark. And I think that says it all, really.
Well, but is that another layer of just another type of asbestos excuse when behind all of this, there have been all these studies in Rendlesham Forest and beyond in which they clearly, it's when the they is UK and US working together, trying to understand propulsion, neutralizing gravity, holograms, and all of the technologies that we know that they have been doing behind all of these paper chases.
Yeah, but you've got to understand it in the context of that statement that I've just read, that person writing that did not suspect for a minute that piece of paper would ever see the light of day. He was writing it in the way that I would write a personal email to you.
Mm-hmm. David, I do have a question before we get too further along. You made a comment a few minutes back, and you said the DI-55 commander met with somebody in the United States.
Yeah.
Who was that?
Well, there's no way of knowing because, as you'll see from the documents, all names are removed under Section 40 of the Act.
What time frame was that?
I would say 1995-6.
And this DI-55 commander had an interaction with the United States. Was it you United States Intel?
Yeah, he was on an exchange visit.
Okay, and it had to do with UAPs?
It was to do with defense intelligence.
Okay, so he goes to the United States. Now they deny there's been any interaction between the governments for what you said earlier, I don't know how many years. But he goes over to the United States and meets with the United States intelligence agencies, okay? And he's the DI-55 commander. And isn't that about the same time ATIP started, Linda?
Well, if you take the Harry Reid story, it went from 2005 to 2012, 7 years.
Okay, so this would have been free.
But John and David, you, I, and our entire Phenomenon Radio audience knows that there was no such thing as a beginning of an investigation in 2007 by the Defense Department of the United States. That goes all the way back to the early 1940s before we even got into the war. We were dealing with UFOs. And therefore, the idea that you could artificially, through the New York Times, through Politico, through the Washington Post, put out something that you think would draw a line in the sand, that the Defense Department did its first investigation with Harry Reid, created money for them starting in 2007. That's crazy. But they are trying to compartmentalize. If you compartmentalize away, the UK and the US have been investigating unidentified aerial objects since World War II.
Yeah, I think they have. Yeah.
Well, here's my question then, knowing that when ATIP started. If he goes prior, and he went and visited the United States prior to Condign being done?
Yeah, but this was not like an official exchange of information. This was him as a sort of a senior RAF official going on an exchange visit and mixing with people of a similar rank to himself. In the USA, and informally they were sort of testing him out. What did he know about this subject? So they were obviously interested in it themselves, but they couldn't say that officially, so they were having to sort of tiptoe around each other and sort of say, well, are you Brits doing anything on this subject? That sort of thing. So none of it was official. He's just reporting on an informal conversation that he had while he was over there.
Okay, so he goes over and talks to the United States. You said that documents clearly show they were worried about the Russians and the Chinese having, being ahead of the game in all of this.
Yeah.
So there's a race between America, UK, Soviet Union, and the Chinese for UAP technology. And I guess one of the things that I wonder is, why would there be such a race if this didn't exist and they knew there was something to it? And the fact that they realized that whatever it is, they could weaponize it, but they just wanted to be the first one to weaponize it.
Well, all I can tell you there is what a very senior defense intelligence officer who I interviewed actually said on that subject, and his take on it was that a lot of it was the Russians sort of saying that they were making these breakthroughs and advances and etc., and they were doing that deliberately to sort of make the West spend lots of money and resources following them when actually none of it was true. And they were doing similar things with all the psychic experiments and remote viewing, etc. All that same information was filtering back to the West, and in some respects, some of it could be just complete disinformation to try and throw the West off what they were really working on. So I'm not saying this is my view. All I can tell you is, from interviewing this guy who was very, very senior in the DIS, that was his view, that a lot of it was complete exaggeration. And because military people are constantly wanting to get more money out of the government, if you're a senior military person and your fund's being cut, you can go to the minister and say, oh, well, we've heard that the Russians are working on they've captured a flying saucer. I think we need some money to spend so that we can do something similar. These are the games these people play.
Well, right, no doubt. And not only do they play the games, but they both sides want the other to think they have more than they do. I don't disagree with any of that. But you go back to the core discussion of why they needed to do this was, what did they know? I guess my point is, what did they know about UAPs that they really thought was that important? And what really is a UAP? And then what I asked you earlier on in the first segment, but you never got a chance to answer, was, first of all, what did they know about UAPs? Do you feel UAPs were involved in Rendlesham? And what's your take on Rendlesham today?
Well, I've always thought that something extraordinary happened there. whether it was something ordinary that was at the base of it, something unexplained happened, and I simply, to be absolutely honest, I don't know what happened there. Is it possible to be honest? You know, I could come out with some fantastic explanation that yes, there was some wonderful top secret underground base where military weapons were being built, but it's just speculation. All I can say is I don't know, but something clearly happened.
Right. What about the UAP reference? I mean, do you think because Pike said they were studying UAPs, that you know there's that technology there?
Pike knew this. He's an astronomer.
Well, he was, according to him, he wasn't an official. Here's where it got interesting about Pike. In one aspect, he says he's doing an official study, but he doesn't identify for who. But then he turns around, and when you say, well, the official study absolutely must have had some kind of government funding, he goes absolutely ballistic about the fact that he had nothing to do with the government.
Well, this is it. How reliable is the source material? Would be my question as a journalist. It's like, does the source stand up to scrutiny?
Well,
so there's loads of people that come out of the woodwork and say, oh yeah, I know this, and I used to work for so and so. A lot of them turn out to be fantasists.
I don't disagree, but I did some FOIA on Pike and his work, and it led to a actual between him and Condyne. I got a FOIA, it's pretty much redacted, but I've talked about this before, but I've never released it, that they did develop a weapons type systems off this phenomenon that was in Rendlesham Forest. And when I pursued it further about, oops, you have what? And what about this and that? And is this behind this and that? They sectioned me. And at that point, they told me they would no longer answer any of my questions until after the entire, all these documents that they still held were released. And they've never released the documents. So I can't ask any more questions, even about the FOIA that I got that has to do with the weapon technology. And believe it or not, they redacted almost everything, but two things that were out of it you could point to. One was BAEA Systems was in the middle of it, and two, there was some kind of a tank company in Ohio that was involved in this too.
Right, I don't know, because I've never seen any of the documents that you're referring to, but I do know, having done quite a bit of historical research on it, that what happened in 1980 wasn't an isolated occurrence. I mean, just going through the RAF Woodbridge logbook, the occurrence report, which I've done for right from the 1930s up to the mid 1960s, I found an entry just after the Second World War, 1946, something seen in the forest, which they thought was an aircraft that had crashed. Very similar to your story. And patrol sent out to look for it in 1946, which seems to suggest there's something in the forest that people keep seeing.
Right, and that goes back to some research I just did from back in the UK, where we have identified ley lines in an energy force that's out closer to the coast. But the interesting thing is that's partly what Pike was supposedly looking at, what was creating this phenomenon that has been seen in the forest, like you said, back even to the 40s. And something else that's never really been looked at closely is the two major UFO incidents that took place. One in the 50s was followed up right afterwards by an incident in New Mexico. And then the following incidents that took place, New Mexico had a similar type incident take place, and then the Rendlesham case took place.
At Kirtland, wasn't it, John?
Yeah, it's in that canyon or whatever, yeah.
It's Coyote Canyon.
Yeah.
And that's where, without question, because I talked with Ernie Edwards, who was the security officer who put that document out and signed it, that there was a UFO, and that's what it says, that landed in Coyote Canyon, which I live about 20 miles from there. And it is a canyon that goes into the Monsanto Mountains, and it is supposed to be stuffed with nuclear missiles.
I just don't know what to make of it, because what I'm saying is if there really is something there in the forest, wouldn't they study it? Wouldn't they want to know what it is?
Well, I would like to think so, but I just know the way the military mind works, and if it's not something that they see as threatening, and it's not something that they've got funds to investigate, unfortunately, that kind of mentality sort of takes over from curiosity. I mean, there's a constant battle going on. You can see it if you follow it through in the documents. That the sort of people who are curious, who think there's something worth investigating, constantly getting knocked back. Sorry, there's no money. We've got far more important things to think about than these flying saucers. You know, that's something you can trace right back to the Winston Churchill era.
But isn't that a phony deflection?
Well, that's one way of interpreting it, and another way of interpreting it is that it's true. That is the predominant attitude, that people weren't interested. I mean, we're interested. That's why we're here now, all talking to each other in 5 different time zones.
Right,
you know,
but David,
but we can't assume that because we are fascinated and interested in this subject, that these people we're talking about, these defense intelligence people, are.
Right. Do you feel though, and our government's worse than yours, because even when you win, you have to take them to court, all the way to almost to the Supreme Court. Then when this Gersten won, he got I don't know how many pages of nothing but blacked out information. Okay, but at least your government somewhat, if you force a hand like you have, is somewhat transparent. But isn't the problem, some of the problem, and did you see it in these documents, because I haven't seen them all, and all your research, is that it's really hard for somebody in the funding area to make a fair assessment of what they should and shouldn't do if things are being held back?
Well, yeah, and they tend to regard people such as myself as just nuisances. You know, people that they really just do not want to deal with. I mean, you may have seen, I think one of the documents I sent you earlier dates from 2000, and they were actually checking me out. They had the Defense Security Agency looking into my background because I'd asked for access to these defense intelligence documents at the time that, as we were just talking about quite recently, they'd disappeared. They'd realised that a lot of them had vanished and presumably destroyed. My letter lands on their in tray exactly the same time, and you can read the paranoia behind the memo. It's like, how does this guy know about this stuff? Who's been leaking this information to him? You know, so little did I know at the time. You know, they were sort of checking me out as well, and I was just doing my job as a journalist.
Yeah, and on that score, again in this July 1st Sunday Express, Mark Brannigan quotes you as he sets up, but by 1997, the word had come down from Whitehall that the security service is investigating, quote, X-file stuff such as alien abductions, close quote, had become, quote, a diversion from their main duties, close quote. Can you elaborate on whatever thinking you have from DI-55 and the man who was running Condyne about the whole human abduction syndrome, because it's a major part of the UFO-UAP phenomenon?
Yeah, they hardly mention that at all. I mean, they mention it almost as a joke, you know, that you know, do not go anywhere near all this alien abduction stuff, you know. I mean, the quote you've just read is one of the outstanding passages in the new files. But the reason why they, in 96, 97, that suddenly they found that their workload had doubled, in fact trebled, they were blaming it on Nick. They were saying that because of the fact he'd come out and sort of said he used to work there and that he believed in UFOs and all the rest of it, and he'd published this book. As a result of that, the person, the successor, Nick's successor, Kerry Philpott, she was very anti-UFO. She was completely opposite in terms of her attitude to the subject, and she was basically moaning to her boss, you know, can't we get out of this mess that we've been left in? And I think quite unfairly blaming Nick for a lot of the workload that she was suddenly receiving, because it wasn't just because of Nick's book, it was because of it, again, like we were discussing earlier, it was all the publicity around the 50th anniversary of the subject. But again, it was all seen as, we can't get the work done we should be getting done, our priorities, you know, which is like briefing ministers on the latest aircraft, you know, the latest defense review. We can't get any of that done because we're constantly being plagued by these people who claim they've been abducted by aliens.
And ironically, David, John Burroughs, that we are talking with, co-host of Phenomena Radio, would fit into the category of somebody who experienced missing time and engulfed in light twice at RAF Bentwaters footbridge.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the last person that they would want to hear from. I mean, there's a classic case file, I think it's from the late 1980s, where a lady from Manchester in northern England writes in and basically says that she's had this close encounter with a UFO, and that she's lost a period of time, and that she's had all kinds of nightmares, etc., etc. And she writes into the MOD and said, "You're the MOD, you're supposed to be defending us. You know, what are you going to do about this?" And the guy just writes back and said, "Oh, well, perhaps you ought to go and see your doctor."
Why? Well,
that was it. No more correspondence.
yeah, and yet in the United States, John and I know that there are units since at least the 1950s and 60s by somebody and some people that we know who their entire Central Intelligence Agency funding and their assignments related to studying people who had been abducted.
Well, I don't think we ever had anything equivalent to that in the UK, because I mean, the amount they spent just on collecting and filing UFO reports was absolutely minimal. You know, it was the lowest of priorities. I mean, they say this over and over again, and the only reason why they maintained a desk was when occasionally, you know, a member of Parliament raised the subject in Parliament, or they got a letter from a minister. They had to have they had to have a statement. They had to be able to say, yes, you know, we're monitoring this subject. We're keeping tabs on it. We don't think there's anything to worry about. And that's the only reason they say. I'm not saying I agree with this. That they even maintained a UFO desk at all.
Well, then, what was your reaction to when Colonel Charles Halt, Deputy Base Commander at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, back in 2006-7 period, did an official press release in England saying that the lights and beams that he had encountered in the forest with his men in December 28th of 1980 were of extraterrestrial origin, quote, close quote.
Well, the only thing I can say to that is it's a pity he didn't say that in 1981, because when he sent his memo to the Ministry of Defence, he didn't mention anything of that. He just simply said unexplained lights.
Unexplained lights, yes. I remember that is the way it was in the document. Well, if he knew then, probably, don't you think that there, John, isn't it true that the NSA, the National Security Agency of the United States, came in quite quickly into RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge after the December 26th to 28th period?
Well, this is what I wanted to ask David about, but it has to do with the reasoning I've been given now on why they came in. Okay, I got a summary. There's been some developments that I haven't seen the report, the full OSI report, but there was a summary given to me by one of the two of the main agents that were involved in the whole Rendlesham case. And what I was told was, and this ties back to even Cobra Mist, was that before some of these events would take place, there would be some kind of strange, they didn't say radioactivity, but there would be some kind of communications or some kind of weird transmission taking place that would be picked up by, they didn't specify what's facility in that area, and that like an event like happened over our 3-night period, there was a strange kind of some kind of frequency or some kind of modulation or something. And so what if you go back to Cobra Mist, one of the reasons why in their official report they closed it down was the fact that there was some kind of inland interference, which then you could go back to what was Pike looking at, what do they know about this phenomenon and what's been seen. But they were coming in to try to get a better understanding of whatever this was could have been. So the NSA did actually come in at one point and put some equipment out there to try to figure out what this modulation may have been or not.
Well, I can help you with the interference at Cobra Mist, because I've actually discussed that with Michael Portillo, who was the defence minister in 1996-97. I actually made a programme. Well, I was interviewed on a programme that he did at Cobra Mist, which was shown on Channel 5 in the UK only quite recently. And he told us that it was the Russians that were jamming the facility. They'd seen it from satellite when it was being constructed, and basically they had ships sailing around in the North Sea jamming the frequencies. And that's what he was told as a defense minister.
Right, but I've actually seen some documents, and I'm just saying this. These are declassified documents that say that some of this interference came from inland. And well, where I'm going with this is simply that I'm not saying exactly what it was, but there was something going on with some kind of modulation. And that's why the NSA got involved in this, was they were trying to figure out what it was. And one of the questions could be, was this modulation affecting, because one of the things that Cobra missed was they said it became obsolete because of satellite technology and stuff. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why they did shut it down also. But was whatever this modulation was it interfering with the new work they were doing on right there outside the gate also? And exactly what was it? Was it something that was provoking something there also? Or was it all Russian or both? And you would definitely think that they'd want to know what it was. And that itself ties into how they could have gotten around some of this. When you have a joint effort between the British and American government working on stuff, to include that after Cobra Mist shut down, a bunch of British people were reassigned and SRI were assigned to Mars from Heath, then you wouldn't have to really have any official, technically, correspondence between America and the British on these different subjects when they're working on it jointly, and there wouldn't be back and forth going on between the two governments.
And David, Stanford University sent really first-class engineers, and they are the ones who said that they couldn't understand what the interfering modulation was. Therefore, that seems to contradict the idea that it was Russians.
May well be, but I mean, all these things have got to be seen in context in terms of when did the people from Stanford say that, and was it then investigated further and they concluded it was the Russians. So you've got to, again, it's all part of the when did people say things and what did they know at that time. And the whole thing is, the whole facility was just a gigantic waste of public money anyway. It didn't work. That's the bottom line. That's why they closed it.
Well, it didn't work because of the interference. That's what the biggest issue was. That was actually the determination by both governments that there was some kind of modulation that was interfering with it. But I guess what I'm going with this is simply this. There is, as you said in that one of the articles, there is something being hidden about technology.
I absolutely agree.
And even ATIP is working, or ATIP was involved in technology, and To the Stars is focusing on technology and even propulsions. And if you go into these MOD documents, they go into all that. They talk about all these possibilities and what a UAV could do and what the benefits of it are.
They do, but the person who's doing the talking, again, I go back to what this senior defence intelligence official told me, was regarded as, quote, a blue sky thinker. Someone who was constantly coming up with ideas, and almost some of them science fiction. The same guy or the same collection of people who were in defence intelligence were talking about a time travel machine as well. But doesn't mean to say that a time travel machine was built or it was anything other than just wild speculation and another attempt to get all of the pot of money that they could spend on doing research. So I think you've got to steer away to some extent from speculating that simply because people talk about these fantastic things that they actually exist and that real research and development has actually been done on them. A lot of it is just talk.
David, I have interviewed two people, one a physicist, one was in Delta Force. And the man who was in Delta Force passed a couple of months ago. But he and the physicist said that they both have time traveled, and they have done it and they don't know each other. I'm the only common denominator. I don't front load. I've never told either one of them about the other, but they described exactly the same kind of structure. And they said the physicist had been involved in a time travel project as early as the 1970s. And he said it works pretty well, but that the people who have to do the time travel are physically destroyed. Their bodies.
Well, again, it's a story, isn't it?
Well,
is it true?
I am an investigative reporter. I do and have a track record of accurate information that has come to me from some whistleblowers. And in this case, I think the physicist is telling the absolute truth.
But the obvious question that an investigative reporter normally would ask is, where's the evidence? A story is only a story. Where's the? You say that people have died. There must be some evidence that someone has died. Where is that evidence?
I didn't say they died of that. I say that one of the two has died. One of the two sources has died this year. He's passed on. But the physicist is still alive, and I think that some of these people need to be considered when you raise this question. Could they have been doing some kind of a time travel experiment in England?
Well, it's not impossible, but I just know from the contacts that I have in the MOD, I just know how tight resources are. You know, there is no money to spend on these kinds of projects, even quite sort of basic technology.
Okay, can I ask you this, David? When you talk to these guys, it was clearly, and this was during the Cold War, obviously, going on. There was a joint UK-American and even somewhat NATO cooperation, and a lot of the stuff that went on was the actual theory and the initial projects would be developed by UK scientists and personnel, and then the US would step in with the funding to help, make it become operational. So the fact that you get these different theories and thoughts coming out, and I totally get where you're coming from about how the Russians, Chinese, and Americans play, the British play a game of we got this but we don't, and all this, and get them to waste money and go down a different hole. And also the fact that they're looking for money themselves to try to come up with these theories. We had a guy by the name of Chuck DeCarlo say a lot of times people come up with these ideas and they have some theories behind it, even some possibilities that make it work, but then they go back to the original weapons that are fail-safe and are a lot cheaper to do. But I guess
they're doing it now, aren't they? I mean, only about how long ago? A couple of months ago, Putin. You remember the press conference?
Right.
We now have nuclear weapons that can outwit anything that the West have got. They can fly on the radar, etc., etc. Is that true, or are they just saying that because they want us to believe that, and we will then waste loads of money developing even more expensive weapons to counter these non-existent weapons that the Russians have got? So it's going on all the time.
Right, and I don't disagree with you on any of that. But I guess where I'm intrigued, and we're running out of time, and this has been a great show, is this. I love the fact that you're pushing the envelope on this, and I would push it further, but I've been sectioned. So until these files come out, I've got some more questions to ask, but they're not going to let me. But I guess there clearly is deception going on inside your government and our government about all of this and what they really know and how far they've developed this technology, even to the, like I said, what the New York Times, what Linda's talking about, the New York Times article and stuff, where they're looking at these propulsion systems and how they can use them and utilize them, and even in the MOD documents about the stealth, the propulsion, and everything else. So there's something to this. The question is, how much of it is real and how much of it isn't?
Exactly, yeah. And I'm quite convinced that they are still looking at this. That it's so deep now. They've obviously given it some other acronym that they can hide behind. They'll be doing work on it and they'll be collecting material about it. But it may be another 50 years before we find out what was really going on. Who knows? But I mean, the fact is we know an awful lot now that we didn't know 20 or 30 years ago.
Right, and David Clark, may you never, ever stop your persistence in trying to get to the truth. You really are a hero in the document search, and we at Phenomena Radio are so grateful that you have spent these 2 hours today, because this was really, really an important bridge between the documents that we've been referencing ever since we have known about Project Condon, and knowing that behind all of it that there has been these scrambled eggs and phony excuses of destroyed documents that are probably underground somewhere.
And David, we've only got about a minute left. Give the audience your website and how they can follow you.
Yeah, well, if you just type into your browser www.drdavidclark.co.uk, that's where I blog. But there's a lot of other material on the website, on the pages, and I will continue to dig. And whenever I find anything, you'll be the first to know. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, and we'll do another Phenomena Radio in the future. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
On behalf of Linda Moulton Howe, John Burroughs, and Dr. David Clark, thanks for listening to Phenomenon Radio. Now stay tuned for 3 hours of Fade to Black with Jimmy Church here on the station that brings you the very best in paranormal talk radio topics on the planet, KGRAradio.com. Good night, everyone.
Presenter today is considered an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking and has authored or illustrated a series of instructional books focused on advanced outdoor techniques. He spent nearly 25 years of his life in the Rockies, and he now lives in the Adirondacks, which is cool because I had no idea that we were kind of neighbors, so I'm looking forward to that. Maybe we can hang out a bit, talk about cool stuff. So he's an avid outdoorsman, but he's also an avid UFO researcher. And he has written extensively on the subject of alien abductions, synchronicities, and owls. Now, in abduction contact experiencer lore, owls have been around quite a bit over the years, okay? Our general understanding of it has been very, very limited. So what is very, very cool today is he's going to talk to you about this particular aspect and just how deep the layers of this go. And I don't think anybody's ever talked about it to the degree or extent that he's going to talk about it today. So this is very exciting, good stuff, new stuff. I had a little story that I didn't tell you yet. On the way up here in the car from the airport, I happened to get a driver who was actually very into all this stuff, so it was a good, the ride went quick, we talked about it. Well, about 15 minutes in, he goes, I want to tell you something weird that happened to my niece and see what you think, And he says, well, like she woke up one night, they found her standing by her window, looking out the window, and there was this weird stuff, and she was talking about some bird, and I go, let me guess, it was an owl. That was a bad move. He almost drove the car off the road. I could see the goosebumps appear on this guy's arm. He's, how'd you know that? Dude, we got a guy coming to the conference. He's going to talk about this. You got to get the tapes. So I know I've sold at least one set of tapes to this guy. Before we got here, he admitted he also had owl experiences. That's how weird this stuff happens. Join me in welcoming Mike Cleland.
I just want to start by saying this is a big deal for me to talk in front of this audience. This is a big deal. I didn't recognize how big this conference was. I was invited to the conference, and the first night I showed up, I kind of peeked in the room here. Big room. So I'm taking this very seriously. This is a big deal for me. How many people in the room here have had unusual experiences with owls? Okay. How many people in this room feel like they may have had direct UFO contact? Okay. How many people had their hand up both times? Great, okay, this talk's for you. So, I'm going to say, gave me a little clicker. I got to make sure I'm testing this. This is the clicker here. I could also do this. Got 2 timers here. I don't want to go over. Great. before I can talk about anything, it was mentioned that I did a lot of outdoor work. So for over 20 years, this was my classroom. I was teaching in the outdoors. And just to give you an idea of who I am and the type of stuff, because this will come up throughout the talk. So my classroom, this was the environment I was. This is Alaska. I spent a lot of time sleeping outside, doing stuff in the mountains, working with maps. I also work as an illustrator. So some of the things you're going to see here is stuff I've drawn. So all this plays into it, but this outdoor stuff, for me, seems to be interwoven into the bigger story. In the fall of 2006, in October, I would have been 44 years old. This is like 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, which is shocking. So this was the very beginning of this part of my life journey. And I was living out west in the Rockies, right near the Tetons, Grand Teton National Park. And I would go out for one night. This is the environment I would go out. I'd go out for one night, sleep out under the stars. The weather was nice. I wouldn't take a tent. And I did it a lot. And I loved it. I still love doing it. And I met someone and got to talking, and I said, "Oh, do you camp a lot? You've been living here for a while, and you camp a lot?" She said, "No, I haven't camped at all around here." I said, "That's terrible." I said, "Let's go camping. I'll take you out for one night." So her name is Kristen, and I met her just like a few days before, and we were camping. So I took her out into the mountains, and we traveled with a very light pack. So we didn't take a shelter, and so there came a point, and it doesn't take very long to get deep into the mountains with a light pack on, and the sun is setting, and I'm making a meal, I'm sitting on a flat rock, and we're talking. And she says something. Sun is setting, moon is rising, it's a really amazing scene. And she says something, and I'm really struck. I'm like, this is a stranger. I'm out there with a stranger. She says something. I'm really struck. Wow, this person has a depth that I didn't expect. I'm like surprised. I'm impressed. And at that moment, an owl flew. And then a second owl flew. Then a third owl flew. And for the next couple of hours, these owls would land near us. They would land on branches near us. They would swoop past us. So we ate our dinner. We set our sleeping bags out. And these were real owls that were right close to us. We'd lay our sleeping bags down on the ground, and you'd lay on your back, and then for 1 second, the stars would get blotted out, and these owls would fly across your face. They're very quiet when they fly. And it was magical. It was so cool. Now, afterwards, the next morning, we're like, wow, that was great. Those owls, ooh, that was neat. So, hey, if I ever come out camping again, I'm going to call you. Is that okay? She's like, great. So a couple days later, it's 4 days later, called her up. We go camping again. We get to a nice spot in the mountains, completely different location in the mountains. We say, let's walk up to the top of that hill and watch the sunset. So we walk up to the top of the hill, we get to the top of the hill, and an owl lands on a branch. An owl swoops above us. An owl lands on the ground. And this time, it wasn't like they were on some branch over there. They were like right there. They would land on the ground right there. Let's look at this little... And they were short-eared owls, pretty common kind of owl. To have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice, it's going to freak me out. Now, what I said, what I did not say in the moment, and what I'm saying now, and have been saying, and like I knew it, so in the moment, right in the moment, there was a thought in my mind, it was like a voice in my head, it was this clear sense of knowing this has something to do with the UFOs. And I knew it and I heard it, and by saying that, I was trying to make sense of some things that had happened in my life as a boy and a young man. Some events that I couldn't explain. I was reading UFO books. I was kind of compulsively reading UFO books at that time. I knew the implications of the stories I was telling you. But there was one detail I could not get out of my mind. I started writing about this stuff and started putting it online. There was one detail from the story that just I couldn't get past. And when I started an online blog, and the first story I posted was that story of seeing the owls. And there was one detail that I so I called up Kristen, And I said, what were you talking about that very first night when the very first owl showed up? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was trying to articulate my deepest beliefs in God. And that's when the very first owl showed up. Now, I was already sort of unsettled at this point, and this one detail just kind of freaked me out a little bit. This already weird event, like, took on this transcendent, deep meaning to me, and I feel like I spent the next few years kind of stuck in this tape loop of basically wondering if I'd gone insane. I had 3 events as a boy. Well, 2 events as a boy and 1 as a young man. The first took place, I was 12 years old in Northville, Michigan. I was looking out my window, I was at a friend's house, and he said, look. And we went to look out the window, and we saw this. It was kind of a coffee can-shaped thing, and it was descending in this very eerie, kind of unusually smooth motion. So it was descending down, and then it disappeared. Kenny and I both ran downstairs. I was with my friend Kenny, and we both ran downstairs, and I drew it. He drew it, and I drew it. This is a drawing from when I was 12 years old. The other drawing was more recent. Kristen, from that initial story, is from Northville, Michigan. In the autumn of 1974, the same year, I'm pretty sure, I was walking home from a high school football game with a friend. We got to that spot in the sidewalk. That's just a house in the neighborhood, about a block from where I was living, and there was a bright orange flash in the sky. It just felt like the sky lit up orange, whoop, turned off. Like God flipped the light switch on, off. Bright orange, weird, iridescent electric orange. We both went, oh, that was strange. We tried a meteorite, an explosion, lightning off in the distance, nothing made sense. I get to my house, walk in the house, my parents are like, why are you out so late? I'm not out late, it's 9:30. The point of the clock was 11:30. The next Monday morning, my friend, also named Mike, said, do you remember we saw a UFO with lights and everything? I never brought it up again. In January of 1993, this one's a little more telling. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked out my window and saw this. I would have been 30 years old, and it was this weird, eerie light. It was backlighting these, and I drew them standing still. They were walking towards the house. This is a scary image. I should have gotten up. I should have gotten out of bed. I should have locked the doors. I should have freaked out. I didn't. I had this voice in my head that said, oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to lay your head on the pillow and shut down. That's exactly what I did. The next morning, I never even bothered to go out and see if there were marks in the snow. I dismissed it in a dream. It was just a dream. It was way more vivid and clear than any other dream I'd ever had, but I was not going to go there. It was a dream. Fast forward to 2009, I started an online blog. So I said the first post was, the first day of posting was that story with Krista and the owls and the owls. So the blog is essays of mine about UFO abductions, synchronicities, and owls. Just kind of morphed into this. And I have been cataloging my own experiences on this site, on this online site. And the one question I ask everyone, as I have been stepping into the role of researcher, the one question I ask everyone is, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And it's not 100%, but it's enough. And I've been documenting, collecting, and archiving these stories on my site. And consequently, what happens now is if you're anywhere in the world, right? If you're in Kuala Lumpur and you've had an experience with a UFO and an owl, I'm one mouse click away. You Google owls, UFOs, and my name comes up. Not only does it come up, it comes up for like the first 10 things. And on my site, I say I want to hear your stories, so I am getting these stories. And it's my partner Andrea is in the room here, and she can confirm this. Get up in the morning and drink coffee, and I just read an owl story aloud, and they are so strange. So people have been sharing this stuff. I wrote an online essay a couple years ago. That online essay turned into a great big fat book called The Messengers. And this book was written in like a synchronistic cloud. I mean, it felt like magic was occurring. It felt like all I had to do was just open my email inbox and the perfect story, the next story for the book would just fall into place. It was a lot of work. I didn't channel it. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it wrote itself in this way that I just feel there's a clue to the fact that it wrote itself so smoothly. Right in the title is the word synchronicity. Now, synchronicity is a term coined by Carl Jung, who was a psychoanalyst in the 1920s and a philosophical guy. He's got a mountain of stuff, but he coined the modern term synchronicity. And the short definition is a meaningful coincidence. So a coincidence that is meaningful to the observer. And I'll talk a lot about synchronicities in this talk. There's a shorter definition that I'm comfortable with, and that's magic. I know that, like, if there's a strict materialist out there, toes are going to curl in their shoes, but that's how it feels to me. I'm content with this term. So initially, in the last, the beginning of that stretch, starting in 2006 in the mountains, I started seeing a lot of owls, like an unusual amount of owls. And I was having powerful synchronicities. Most of these are archived in the blog, and a lot of them show up in the book. That book is partially my own research and partially my own experience. And the onslaught of what I was getting as far as these experiences, these memories, these synchronicities, these owls, it was not easy. These experiences are challenging. So anyone out there who's doing research, just know that the people you're interacting with, it is not easy. It is terribly, terribly challenging stuff for the person. And I'm speaking for myself. Those were dark years for me. I feel much better. I feel like that book was therapy. The 3 years it took me to write that book was 3 years of my own therapy, and I feel like I'm a much calmer person since that book came out. I'm going to tell a lot of stories in this talk. None of them are one-offs, right? So if I tell you a story, it's part of a bigger series of stories. Behind it is a whole collection of stories, so there's no standalone account that I'm going to tell. If I tell something, it's part of a pattern. This guy named Derek, camping in the desert, but in 1995, and he's lying on his back with his buddy, looking up at the stars, and they look at this cactus, and there's this owl on top of this cactus. And they're like, well, that's kind of eerie. That's kind of spooky. And that's what people say. When people see owls, even in the bright sunshine, they see an owl, and it's like, it's an ominous bird. It's not like seeing a bunny rabbit or a sparrow. So he looks at this owl, and they both like, wow, that's strange. Owl flies off. And then moments later, a triangle UFO, a triangle-shaped craft, absolutely silently buzzes over very fast and follows the contour of the land. I met with this guy, Derek, and he struggled. You could see he was gritting his teeth trying to articulate how weird this thing was flying and moving. So he listed a lot of other things. I said, what else has happened in your life? I said, well, I saw another UFO a couple days later. And I had a lot of powerful synchronicities in my life, and I've had these weird dreams. I'm like, what kind of dreams? Like being lifted out of my bed and floated through the wall. And then he said something that I hear a lot. He said, I had a spiritual awakening, all tied into this stuff. And I said, do you think you're a UFO abductee? He said, no. So I wasn't going to push him on that. If he says no, that's fine. There's a term I'm using, it's called the maybe people, and this sort of implies people who have had these unusual experiences, sort of the outlying experiences. They don't remember being on a craft, they don't remember being taken on board a flying saucer, but they tell all the outlying things that an abductee might share. And I feel a strong kinship to these maybe people because that's who I was at one point. I feel like I'm past that point now. I'm no longer questioning my own experiences. Now, the core question of the book, the core question of this talk, the core question of my research, the core question of my own self-examination is why owls? Why owls show up in the context of this? The short answer is I don't know, but before I can proceed any deeper into this, I need to talk about the mythology of the owls. Now, this is from a cave in France. It's 30,000 years old. Anyone, Derek lying in the desert in 1995, this man who scratched it into the wall 30,000 years ago, had to have recognized the power of seeing an owl. I recognize that I've seen a lot of owls. They're a mystical, powerful animal. And the mythology, the core of the mythology is that owls can see into the darkness. They can see at night, they can fly at night, they can fly in the darkness. That very quickly, all across the world's traditions, becomes a metaphor for seeing into the darkness, seeing into other realms, traveling into other realms, traveling to the land of the ancestors, traveling to the land of the gods. Owls are messengers. They not only travel to these realms, they come back. Owls represent dream time and the unconscious in these myths. Owls are associated with death. Some traditions are very morbid. The Native Americans of the Southwest have a very dark, bleak mythology around owls. I'm not finding that. I'm finding the death mythology. I'm finding people are, this is very common. Someone's grieving, usually a parent has died, an owl will show up, land on the back porch, land on the window, they'll open up the window, they'll talk to the owl. They'll go through they'll say, "Mom, I miss you." And then their grieving will have been alleviated. I have numerous accounts of this. We get the term wise owl from Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom. So that's why you get wise owl, traces back there. She had their companion little owl. This is a close-up of a terracotta pot, and that's called a little owl. That's the species name. Present day, Harry Potter has this owl Hedwig. Hedwig delivers the mail. It's perfect. It's perfect. He's the messenger. He has an owl that is a messenger. So, ancient man had all these mythologies. They are still rattling around. They're still here right now, present day, in the most popular books in the history of publishing. An owl delivers the mail. J.K. Rowling has owl embedded right in her name. Oh, I'm doing good on time. So I was at a conference. This was back in then when they had the conferences at Laughlin, Nevada. Very early on. I was very nervous when I went to this conference, and I sat in the UFO abduction support group. So you sit in a circle. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous. People are kind of nervous. No one really wants to talk. And there's this one guy off in the corner. He's kind of quiet and sitting there, and then at the very end of the meeting, he kind of cautiously raises his hand, and he said, "Hey, has anyone in this room had any odd experiences with owls?" And I tell you, this guy almost fell out of his chair when everyone all at the same time raised their hand. And then we were like, "Okay, what's your story?" And he says, "Well, I'm driving at night, and I'm driving down this lonely road, and there's this owl standing on the side of the road. It's about 4 feet tall. And I pull right up to it, and I roll down my window, and I look at this thing, and it looks at me. And it's like I'm in the driver's seat, and it's about eye level with me. It looks at me, and I get this really bad vibe. And I drive on. And then later, he's a photographer, so he tells the story. He goes, I'm a photographer, I go into the woods, and there's this owl nest. I know this owl nest in the woods. So he went there, and he was his camera, and he's taking these pictures. He looks up at this owl nest through the camera, and these owls, and he says, "I don't think that was an owl I saw that night." And he went through hypnotic regression to see what happened that night on the road. Nothing really came up. The only thing that came up was that the owl was wearing boots. So there's a term screen memory that's used in the UFO research lore, and most of the people know what this means. I just got to run through this. Screen memory implies that something is projecting an image, a hypnotic image, into the mind of the observer. This would be a way to mask their presence. So the implication is that there's an alien standing on the side of the road, though the observer sees an owl. How this happens, I don't know. I went to a conference a few years ago. I wish I could have done this here. I loved doing this. It was so much fun. I made cardboard owls in my living room, and this one here is 4 feet tall, and this one here is 27 inches tall. Now, I'm 6 foot tall in the middle there. So if someone came to me and told me I saw an owl that was about this big, about 27 inches tall, I'd say, I'll give you that one. That's about as big as any owl on Earth will ever be, but I'll give you that. That could be a real owl. But that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing stories of people saying, "Oh, I saw this 4 foot tall owl." And then, so that, this was actually important for me to do, to make this cardboard owl, because I knew right away no one Like, you got to try hard to like say that's normal to see an owl that size. So what I did is I went in my neighborhood there, and I drove off into the woods, and I got on a lonely road, and I got in my Subaru, and I like drove up to this owl, and I backed up, and because this is what people are reporting. They're reporting the owl looking over the hood of the car. So I showed this in a talk one time. This is the very first talk I ever gave on this. I showed this slide, and a fellow in the audience went like this. I didn't see it, but his wife did. His wife came up and told me about it. My husband, look at this. And she said, I never believed him when he described what he saw. I met both of them. They were wonderful folks. And he shortly there, he sent me this thing that he had drawn in 1987, which looks remarkably like the slide I just took. So that is a 4-foot tall owl that he's drawing from memory. It doesn't quite look like an owl. There's a woman, her pen name is Lucretia Hart. She's got an amazing blog. Anyone who's out there, you might want to write this down, @Spiral's End. It's an amazing website. She's cataloged everything in her life as far as the UFO contact experiences. She's had a lot, very weird stuff. She was working as a 19-year-old girl in a summer camp for girls, and this would have been in the Pacific Northwest. And she describes, there's two parts of the camp, right? There's some buildings over here, and there's a path, and there's some buildings over there, and she walks down this path, and she can hear the girls playing in the background. She's walking along, she turns the corner on the path, and there's a gray alien standing right next to her on the path. And she makes this contact with this thing, like telepathically, and this thing looks at her, and she looks at it, and she looks at her, and there's this like back and forth, and she hears this voice in her head that goes, owl, 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 and she watches it change into an owl right in front of her, turns around and runs into the woods. So screen memories aren't just stuck with owls. It's owls, deers, raccoons, clowns, dead relatives. Jesus actually shows up a lot in these reports. The implication is that these aliens have like a psychic closet, right? And they can just grab the costume, whatever they need, right in the moment. They can just grab, ooh, owls can be perfect right now. Ooh, clown, that'll be a good one for right now. So now, I'm going to kind of move past the screen memory stuff. And if you ask an abduction researcher, someone who does abduction research, you say, hey, do you have any experience with owls in your thing? They'll roll their eyes and I'm like, of course, I got all kinds of stories of owls. Oh, the owls show up all the time, and then they'll tell the screen memory thing. 4-foot tall owls on the road, 4-foot tall owls in the bedroom, 4-foot tall owls in the yard. I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I'm talking about. So and then you ask an abductee, someone who's had the direct contact experience, you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And they'll say, that's interesting you say that. No one has ever really asked me that question. That's funny you ask, because I've had this weird thing happen with owls. Now, it's not 100% of the people with contact experience, but it's enough that there's a very clear pattern. So again, the question, why owls? Now, when I saw those owls in the mountains back in 2006, those were real owls. They were little owls, they were owl sized, they did little owl things, they had little owl feathers, they were not 4-foot tall, eerie looking owls. These are real owls. So the focus of my research, what I find is more interesting, is why are real owls showing up in the context of this stuff around the time of contact? What I'm going to try to do now is buzz through a bunch of stories and just give you an idea of the flavor of the kind of things that I'm showing. So someone asked me, it's like, how do you know this stuff with owls and UFOs is real? Do you have any proof? And I'm like, you want proof? Look at my email inbox. That's proof. It's Derek, the first story that I told here. Seeing the owl in the cactus, then sees the UFO. This is very common. See the owl first, see the UFO. I had one woman channel, she said owls are to announce initiation. So seeing an owl and then seeing a UFO. This woman in Brazil tells me this story. She's on her balcony. She sees this UFO fly by, this silvery craft. It flies by, and there's a building across from the balcony of her apartment building. This silvery craft flies by, goes behind the building, and then it doesn't come out the other side. And she goes, guys, where are you? And at that moment, 2 owls fly past her, and those 2 owls ended up living on her balcony for the next month. seeing an owl, seeing a UFO, and an owl shows up at your home is very common. Very common. I got these pictures. I get people show me these pictures. People who have had UFO contact experience. I talk to them. You have these long conversations. They share their stories, and then they send you pictures like this. I said, "Yeah, I just took this on my porch. It was 5 feet away." I have a lot of pictures like this. Suzanne and Jack, friends with myself and Andrea, both of them experiencers. A lot of weird synchronicities in their life, how they met. But anyway, they lived together in Providence, Rhode Island, and there was a noise out their window every night. So how often? Like pretty much every night. Most nights of the week, we'd hear this weird noise out the window. And Jack said, "You know what that noise is? That is a baby raccoon." And went on for a year. They'd hear it every night. And then Suzanne heard something online. She found this little site that had owl noises. Oh, here we go. Great. So they hear this noise out the window most nights of the week. And that's an eastern screech owl. Pretty common. So there's nothing that unusual about it, but it's outside the window of two abductees. So Suzanne, tells a story. She hears this noise in the yard. She's in the yard. She takes her phone and she puts it on record. She's like, "I'm going to record this for Mike, for me." So I'm now involved in this story. She's recording it for me. So she's this tree in the neighbor's yard, and she walks up to this tree. It's getting dark. She puts the phone up. She's looking. She doesn't see the owl. She sees this orange dot go, poof, like light up, like a big orange flash, turns off, and then the owl noise stops. There was no owl in the tree as far as she knew. Hearing an owl right before a contact event. So guy lying in bed, hears an owl outside the window, hooting. Next thing he knows, there's 6 alien beings standing around his bed, and he blacks out. Hearing an owl right after a contact event. So I was at a gathering in Maine, and a bunch of people, a lot of them with UFO contact events. This was after a conference that's run in Maine annually. And people are sitting down by the lake, and so these 2 women, Carol and Pam, are sitting down by the lake, and it's late. It's like 2 in the morning. They walk down to the lake, and the moon, full moon's beautiful, but it's cold, right? It's kind of cold and chilly down by the lake. And then they're talking for a little bit, and then they say, "It's 4 o'clock. It's 4 o'clock. We came down here too. It's 4 o'clock. What happened?" And I was down there earlier that night, and there's no way you can kind of just hang out. It was like bitter cold. So there's no way 2 hours. They were scared. So they went back. Now there's this camping scene where everyone is camping and close together, all these tents. And so they climb in their little tent and they're camping together. And Carol says, "Let's ask the owl." Carol says, "Let's ask the owl for a sign if we were, in fact, really visited. Let's ask the owl to hoot for us." At that moment, hoot, 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 right above them, loud crashing, sticks are falling on top of the tent. So they asked, they got an answer. There's more to that story. There's so much more to that story. I wish I could tell the whole thing. Expecting to see an alien, but seeing an owl. I have 2 accounts that are almost exactly the same. People are like, "I'm going to go for a hike today," and then they're like, "Oh, today's the day. I'm going to see an alien. Today is the day I know I'm going to see an alien." One guy's driving there. It's almost the same story. So this guy's driving. John is driving there. Andrea knows John. Where he's on his way. The car in front of him has a bumper sticker that says, "Today is the day." So he goes on his hike. He's walking on this path, and there's this big owl. And it's staring at him, and he stares at it. And he says, "I'm going to have a stare-down contest with this owl." And it just goes on and on and on. It's like, oh, I think he's going to win. So he turns and walks away, and as he walks away, the owl watches him the whole time he's walking off. And then he gets to the top of this mountain, and there's a bunch of people there. It's in New England, so it's kind of a smallish mountain. And he gets to the top at the end of the hike, and there's a bunch of people up there. And then one guy goes like, "What's that light over there?" And there's this bright, hovering dot of light, full daylight, off in the sky, sort of seemingly staring at the mountain. There's a lot more to that story, too. He got up the next morning and meditated, and an owl started hooting, and that continued for the next month, every time he meditated. Hearing an owl and then seeing a UFO. This shows up, so a woman on the beach, she's with drinking a margarita, she's with her husband, they're looking out at the ocean, they hear an owl, and she's like, "What is an owl doing at the beach?" And she looks around the edge, and then she looks up at the sky, and there's a silvery craft her husband's a big doubter. He says, like, what do you think of that? And he's like, oh, I don't know quite what to make of that. That's not a conventional aircraft. So hearing an owl while reading my book, this one, I can't even, like, I could have done the whole 90 minutes, one story after another, people reading the book. I have this one woman who told the story, she's reading the book, and the owl would hoot outside. She'd lie in bed, she'd read the book, the owl would hoot outside, she'd close the book. It would stop. She'd open the book up and it would start up again. And when she finished the book was done, she never heard the owl again. This shows up, I don't know, this is like involves me in some way that just like, I don't know how to make sense of it. One guy from New Zealand, he's been videotaping orbs and taking photographs of orbs. He's got all this stuff cataloged. He's been keeping meticulous notes. He's like 17 years old. So he's like, so he goes out and he's like, there's an orb. There's an owl. There's an owl on the fence, or on the phone line, and there's an orb up above it. And so he's looking at the owl. The owl's looking at the orb. He looks at the owl looks at him. The owl's looking at the orb. I'm not sure if that counts as a multiple witness sighting, but. So Jack, remember this, so Jack and Suzanne earlier on. So Jack, from that photograph, he's the guy that said it was a baby raccoon. So he was reading the book, and he had it on his Kindle, and he was reading it on and off at work, and he was just finishing it, so he gets to the end of the book, and he's in the parking lot at the spot he works, and he gets to the very end of the book, and he says, I want to see an owl. I want to see an owl. So he finishes the book, he leaves that car, he walks across the parking lot, and he looks up in the sky, and it was less than a minute after finishing the book. He looks up in the sky, and I was like, what? Like, I drew this with his work. He said it was like this little dash, but it was more like a tear in the sky. It was like the light was shining through a tiny tear in the night sky. It lasted for about 10 seconds. There's this weird thing, and people who've had these experiences or people who've researched this stuff is going to recognize this. There is a strange, tangled, chaotic context to this stuff. The more tangled the story, the more I trust it. There is something of confirmation in these knotted up stories. They get really hard to tell. You try to write this stuff out, and like, oh, here, I'll share this in a book. It's like, it's so much going on. And every little thread you pull on is just something weirder. I feel like this has happened to me. So Mike C. gets a hold of me. He's asked that I not use his real name, but it's Mike C., and that's my name, Mike C. So this one gets confusing, so pay attention. And this comes from a guy with a lot of odd experiences. Now, we met, Mike C. and Mike, we met. I signed his book at this conference that I was talking about in New England. And this would have been in August of 2016, so less than a year ago. So his story is, he lives in Springfield, Massachusetts, and he's driving home. He's crossing the Memorial Bridge, and this whole story came to me in back and forth Facebook chat. So I have like this, everything's time counted, and I can review what exactly the conversation is. So I got a story for you. So I was coming home, and I was crossing the Memorial Bridge, and just after I crossed the bridge, I was making this turn on the roundabout, and this owl whoosh, like flies right across my windshield, full daylight, scares the crap out of me. So he crosses the bridge, there he is, owl passes the windshield. Drives a little less than a half mile. He looks over, and there's a UFO hovering above one of the buildings there, just to the upside of the highway there. And he says, copper-colored flying saucer, and then whoosh, zips off. And then he says, oh yeah, and by the way, as I was doing this, I had a thing loaded on my MP3 player. It was one of your talks. It was a lecture you had given about owls and UFOs, and I was listening to that. I was like, wait, what? You were listening to me, and you saw an owl, and you saw a UFO? As I was talking about owls and UFOs, he's like, yeah, I did. That was kind of, so now, well, one little thing here, I get to use a laser pointer. Let me just do this. One little thing here is this message came in at 1:23 p.m. Now, I'm not going to start a new religion over the little number sequences, but I'm going to point them out. That number is particularly powerful for me. I pay attention when that number shows up, 123 and 1234. So he gets back to me. He says, dude, I just looked at the message you sent me at 11:11 a.m. So we get 11:11, we get 123. So a year later, this happened the year before I met him. A year later, we meet at the conference. I sign his book. About a month later, he's driving down the same highway. And he crosses, I get to use the pointer. He crosses this bridge here, And right here, he gets stuck in traffic, and in front of him is an owl, a little owl toy in the back of a car. Now it's so it's like, oh, okay, an owl toy, cross the bridge. Okay, so timestamp 333. So we get this owls, UFOs, conversation between two people named Mike C. Get 123, get 111, 1 and 333. Like this is a subtle form of confirmation. I pay attention when this stuff shows up, but one detail of this whole story just jumped out at me and like rang the bell for me. The owls were seen right after crossing a bridge. Now I'm at the point now where I'm like seeing reality. Like you go to the gypsy fortune teller and she interprets your dreams, right? And if you went to her and said, in my dream, I crossed a bridge and I saw an owl. She said, oh, the mythic symbolism of the owl and the bridge, this is important stuff. This happened in real life. He crossed a bridge and saw an owl twice. Now, the metaphor, the symbolism of the bridge is overcoming an obstacle. Life is the river, you cross the river, you overcome an obstacle, you come to a new place in your life. The bridge is neither here nor there. It's not on one side of the river or the other, it's between. And then after starting this new chapter of your life, I'm doing dream analysis here, after starting this new chapter of your life, the owl plays the role of messenger. When I told him that, we talked about that, he's like, oh God, that hits so hard. That felt very real to him. There's these clues that show up, and I call these orchestrated clues. They show up, they're symbolic, or sometimes they're so specific that only the observer would have the ability to untangle these clues. So from my sense, these clues, certain clues are forcing people to pay attention. This woman, Jessica, called me, contacted me. She told me, she's like, I was laying in bed one night. Window is right there, and I look out the window, and there's an owl. And then this blue beam of light zoom, hits the owl in the head, illuminates the owl's head. It looks right at me. A blue beam shoots out of the owl and into my third eye. And she said, my whole head was illuminated with this light. So I get a hold of her, and I said, was this a dream? She said, no, this happened. This happened. This was not a dream. I asked her, what do you think the source was? She said, the source was extraterrestrial. I felt it. I knew it. It was extraterrestrial. And then she said, I've been given a download. Now, this woman has seen close-up UFOs and had a lot of psychic experiences in her life. My partner, Andrea, who's in the back there, she comes home from work, and she pulls into a parking spot at the house we're living at, and she's kind of facing the trees. It's unusual. It's a spot she never usually parks at. So she pulls the car in, she parks there, she's facing the trees, and she gets on her phone and says, Mike, there's an owl. So I run downstairs with the camera, and sure enough, there's this beautiful barred owl in a tree. There it is. That was a photo taken right from that site there. So we're standing there looking, and I'm kind of tall, right? So I can tell, and Andrea comes to about there, and I've got the camera, and I'm taking pictures right from her point of view. We're looking at this thing, and she goes, uh-oh. I said, what's up? What's up? I said, something's happening. Something's weird's happening. And she said this, she's like, in the moment, she's saying, like, oh, this is like, everything's wavering, something's going on. And she basically said time had stopped. And the reality just kind of became wavy, and there was a magenta halo around this owl. She was locked eyes with this owl. I'm taking pictures. There's nothing for me to see. I used Photoshop to create this, and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't see anything. The owl eventually flies off. And there came a point when I was working on the book, and I was working on Jessica's story, the story with the blue beam from the owl out the window hitting her in the third eye and giving her a download. And this would have been months later, and I was like, wait a minute, this is the same story Andrea, this is the same story you had in the parking lot in some sense. So I kind of reviewed both of them, and I was kind of like, I was very cautious not to question Andrea too much, and I said, when you were looking eye to eye with that owl in the tree and the magenta halo, what would you call that communication? And she went, like, yeah. And I said, well, what would you call it? She said, I'd call it a download. Now, Grant was here last night and did all kinds of downloads, stories, one after another about people writing songs and stuff. This is a little more elusive. So I asked both independently, without them knowing it, I asked Jessica It's like, what was in the download? And I asked Andrea. So Jessica's first, she said, in all honesty, I don't know. I feel like the answers may come when I am ready, or it may forever be an unspoken thing. I asked Andrea the same thing. I actually asked her to write it down. And she said, it was a strong sense of knowing, as if something was imparted, and this would reveal itself when the time was right. Now, this is what I expected. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I got to download. And you say, what was it? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It'll happen. I'll know someday. This is normal. This is normal within the context. So this pattern between the two of them. So the same day I do this back and forth thing where they're trying to tell them to download. Andrea and I are sitting, which is unusual because we sit on the couch and watch TV at night. So I'm sitting in one chair, she's sitting in another chair. She's reading a book, and she goes, uh-oh, this is weird. I'm like, what's up? She's like, in this book, this is weird. It's the same thing. It's the same story. And she's reading a book called Calling on Extraterrestrials by Lisette Larkins. It's about how to contact ETs, how to have your own ET contact. And the story in the book is this Lisette Larkins, she channels aliens. So it's kind of at the one end of the continuum of what's like on the new age, she's not a very nuts and bolts researcher, Lisette Larkins. So she's had her own experiences. And she describes this yellow truck. And she was in a bad place in her life at that time. So she was, in the yellow truck had a vanity plate that said moping. And whenever she walked past this truck, she'd say, that's me. That truck represents me. I'm moping. So that truck represents me. She's driving by the truck one day with her boyfriend. Stop! There's a hawk on top of this truck. It's not an owl story, it's a hawk story. It's this hawk on top of the truck. She gets out. She gets up, she goes right up to, she says she gets like inches away from the hawk's eyes. She locks eyes with the hawk, and she said, I knew without a doubt that I was connecting to extraterrestrial life. A strong message was being transferred from the hawk's eye to my own. My scalp felt as if it had been plugged into a generator. So she's essentially saying the same thing. And what's interesting, her boyfriend was taking pictures. So the same thing. I was taking pictures of Andrea's owls. This guy's taking pictures of Lisette's owl. So I said, I got to get a hold of this woman, Lisette. So it took me a while, right? I got a publisher. I find the forward thing, and I forward emails. And it took like a month before we actually got on the phone. And I said, hi, I'm the guy who had the owl story. Wait, you're the owl guy. You're the owl guy with the owl story, right? Oh, that's funny. The day I got your initial email, we were having the kids over, the grandkids were over, and we were in the pool in the backyard, and they were splashing around. The dogs were running around. This owl lands on the flagpole in the middle of all of it. Dog sits at the bottom of the flagpole and barks at the owl. The owl just stood there. And I was like, wait a minute, is this the same day that I sent you the email? You have an owl landing on a has that ever happened? No, never happened before. So I'm like, okay. She's in contact with aliens. She's very clear about that. She channels ET. I said, what does this mean? Without skipping a beat, she said, don't forget what you came here to do. As a little aside, Andrea's middle name is Lisette. Owlet, that's in the dictionary. Open the dictionary, look up owlet. It's a baby owl. Basically, a baby owl is an owlet. It's in the dictionary. Owlet, is also owl ET. So there's these synchronicities that show up in the research. Nick Redfern said about you doing UFO research, he said, it's not that it's weird. He said it's too weird. And then Ann Strieber, when she was helping her husband, Whitley Strieber, with the research, she said, I have a BS detector. People tell me a story, I have a BS detector. If it's not weird, I don't believe them. So there's this weird stuff, and when this weird stuff shows up, it's like I pay attention to it. So for me, for a thought experiment, I am thinking owls, synchronicities, and UFOs, are these the same thing? Now, obviously, they are not the same thing. They all have the same transformative power. They are transformative events. You can be transformed by a UFO contact. You can be transformed by a powerful synchronicity. And I have heard so many people write me and tell me that, like, I saw this owl and it changed my life. And they tell some normal thing, like, owl landed on the fence in the backyard and it changed their life. There's a woman, her name is Katie Walker. She's a producer. Her and her husband produced this really good documentary. I'd recommend it. This documentary is called Time is Art. It's about synchronicities. And one of the things they were doing was they went to the Mission District of San Francisco, which has all these murals. These murals feature UFOs. Oh, I could use pointer again. So there's a UFO up here, right? And so there's this Native Americans, shamans, are performing a ceremony in traditional dress. If you look over here, there's a gray alien, right? And if you look over in this tree, that little tree, there's an owl. So they're shooting this. They're basically saying, this is cool imagery. This is like really powerful imagery. It's trippy. It's the creative process. And so there's more of it. There's another owl mural they were shooting. And so there's all these owls. So they set the camera down as they're shooting the thing. So they set the camera down. And they get this. I played a couple times in a couple higher contrasted. Okay, so it doesn't get more clear than that, right? Get owls, a documentary on synchronicity. They're shooting images with owls, and a UFO shows up. I quizzed them. I quizzed this woman, Katie Walker, like, you didn't stage this, did you? She's like, no, I did not. We didn't even know. We went to the editing, we saw this thing, we had no idea. We just set the camera down and we caught it accidentally. Katie Walker contacted me. I was doing a podcast series for a while. I got about 200 hours of podcasts on that blog that I showed you earlier. And she said to me, you know who you should have on your show? You should have Dolores Cannon on your show. Now, I had already started the Owl book at that point, and it was kind of in its rough stages, and I'd collected a lot of stuff, and one of the stories I had written was about Dolores Cannon. And she said, you should have Dolores Cannon on your things. But when I checked the email that came in, that was the message on the email. When I checked the email, I went, cha-chunk, 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 and it was 20 separate messages came into my email inbox. I'm, Katie, what did you send this thing 20 times? What are you doing? And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She sent me a PDF copy of the book, The Custodians, which I already had. The date that this arrived, October 18th, 2004, was the day Dolores died. I don't know what to make of this. The story that it's in the book that I shared that I had already written is in The Custodians.